Welcome to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Good morning. Welcome into Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. That's Austin Jacobsen. I'm Ravi Lulla here at Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. What's up, Austin?
Oh, just hanging out, recovering. Nebraska Prep Football Award Show last night.
Yeah.
We flipped the stage quickly.
Well,
I mean, it was
not
impressive.
us personally.
Well, speak for yourself.
Not me personally. I went home to figure out what we were going to talk about today. It's
That's
National Signing Day.
It is.
Lots going on. If you're wondering where DB is, he's actually anchoring the Husker Sports Radio coverage, Husker Sports Network coverage, for the National Signing Day down in Lincoln. So he'll try and join us throughout the show if
Let's go, baby.
Yeah, just like that.
That's the only way we'll hear
Here
him.
in spirit.
We do have a jam-packed show for you here today, and it starts in just a couple minutes where we will talk to Christian Jones from Omaha Westside. He signs at 7:30. He reaffirmed his commitment to Nebraska a couple days ago, as did our guest at 7:20, Tyson Terry from Omaha North. We'll talk to him as well, and then we will wrap up our discussion with recruits at 7:30 with Jackson Carpenter from Lincoln Southwest, also signing with Nebraska today. And then we will get into some of our regular guests. We'll have Brian Christopherson, Husker 24/7 at 8, Andy Kendy from KETV at 8:30. And then we got a special guest today, Nick Bahe at 8:45, because both teams he played college basketball for play tonight here in Omaha, in Kansas, and Creighton. So we'll talk to Nick Bahe at 8:45. And then Mitch Sherman at 9. And then we will wrap things up with our recruiting guru, Tim Verghese from Inside Nebraska at 9:45. So as I said, jam-packed show today, and really jam-packed week of stuff going on, Austin.
Yeah, and it never ends, too, does it? Because if you get off of Twitter for more than an hour, you miss out on a new edition of something interesting. And even last night, college football playoff released. Alabama's back in somehow, some way. And, yeah, I mean, whether you look at college basketball, you're looking at college football, professional football obviously is still ramping up towards the postseason. It's just a jam-packed, busy first week of December.
Well, and I got to give credit again. I don't know if DB turned into like a witch doctor or something, but he went 2-0 again last night with his college basketball picks. He took Nova and whoever beat Wake Forest, whoever A&M, Texas A&M. He called them both, got them both. The dude's on like an absolute heater. He's gotten like 12 out of his last 14 or something.
It's impressive.
It's sort of stupid at this point. I think. I don't know what's happening.
He mixes sports, too.
He does.
I don't know how he does it.
He'll go college football. He'll go college basketball. He'll go NFL. He hasn't given me an NBA one yet, so I'm waiting for him to get really
well, he's waiting for Padilla to give that one to him.
Yeah.
Probably.
I don't know if he's just hasn't all the way feeling himself yet, but we'll see what happens there. But in a couple minutes here before we talk to Christian Jones, there are a few more players that entered the transfer portal yesterday for Nebraska. Daniel Kalen, James Williams, and Princewell Umamielen. I believe that is the most updated list we have of guys in the portal, which brings our total to 8 since the end of the season here. The only one, honestly, that really surprised me, I know people are going to probably be the most upset about Princewell because of what we've seen from him. That one, frankly, did not surprise me a ton. The one that surprised me a little bit was James Williams. Not from an ability standpoint, although I do think he is useful for Nebraska, mostly from he seemed super bought in. Now, I don't know with the roster crunch if he's just a casualty of that.
Right, yeah. And that's, I think, the conversation that a lot of Husker fans are mixing in now with the emotional departure of a lot of guys that head out of the portal, that make these long announcements. And to be completely fair, Williams is the only one to actually make a public post for Nebraska fans, giving at least a somewhat sentimental statement as to why he's leaving. Everybody else is just going through different channels to be able to tell ESPN or tell this one or tell, some different form of a Twitter profile that they're moving on into the transfer portal. They give it a retweet and give it a go.
Yeah.
But James Williams is the only one who wrote out an entire graphic, put out a little bit of a short post there. I think this probably maybe was a more difficult conversation for him. And just with what we've been able to piece and gather with different parts of maybe, his upbringing, kind of the struggles in his life and what he's been through, you have to wonder if maybe this is just a chance for him to put his name for a chance for more money in NIL. I don't want to speak for him
No.
on that perspective, but if you were ever given a chance in any walk of life to make more money, you probably should. And maybe that was the conversation that James had with Husker coaching staffs, different, agencies, whatever that conversation looks like. But if that's an opportunity, you should go out and take it.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I've said kind of all along with these opportunities is for a lot of these guys, this is going to be their most earning potential they ever have.
Right.
And you have to take advantage of it. Speaking of opportunities, we've got Christian Jones now from Omaha Westside who has the opportunity to sign his letter of intent today. Christian, how are you this morning?
I'm good. How are you?
We are doing super well. We appreciate you joining us. We know you've got your signing ceremony in just a little bit here, so we appreciate you taking the time out. So I'll get right into it, Christian. You were one of the first guys as there was, Tony White was leaving and there was, a little bit of turnover on the coaching staff. You were one of the first guys to come out and say, hey, I'm with Nebraska regardless of this. We wish Coach White the best. What made you so confident in your decision in Nebraska that even the departure of the defensive coordinator didn't faze you at all?
Yeah, I mean, that's just how college football is nowadays. I mean, I would be really surprised if I had the same coordinator for 4 years. That's just how it is. So, I mean, I've always expected him to leave. He's a great coach, and I wish the best for him. But I believe in Coach Rule. I know he has a plan, and I know he definitely wasn't blinded by Coach White leaving. So he's got a plan, and I trust his plan.
You talk a little bit about trusting the plan. You committed earlier in the season, but maybe a little bit later than what other people have done through your recruiting class so far. What was the turning point for you after that Colorado game or just earlier in your recruitment that really turned the tide for you to go Big Red?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I just saw the players playing with a different level of effort, a different level of, I would say, toughness, and didn't see that all that much the prior years, but I kind of saw it click, and their culture was a little better, and saw it trending in the right direction. So that's why I pulled the trigger.
Christian, what is it that you think you bring to the table for Nebraska? Obviously, had a great career at Omaha Westside. You're very familiar with my typical co-host DB here, so we won't give him too much credit. But what do you think you bring to the table for Nebraska?
I will bring a winning mindset. I'm going to bring my hardest working every single day, and I'm not going to get complacent. I'm not going to let the people playing aside of me down. Yeah, I'm just going to bring that winning mindset. And that's kind of my biggest thing that I want to bring to Nebraska when I go down there. It's just we did a lot of winning in high school, and I want to keep doing a lot of winning in college.
Ravi had mentioned Tony White obviously moving on. Have you had conversations with any of the staff there, Coach Rule, or anyone else about what your fit will be defensively moving forward?
No, not at the moment. I think I will be going down there for the bowl game practices, so I think we would have those discussions more so at that time.
Christian, we appreciate the time for sure. Enjoy this day. It's a big day for you. Obviously, you've worked a long time to get to this point, but as you said, you got plenty of work to do after you get down to Lincoln as well. We wish you the best of luck.
Thank you, sir.
That's Christian Jones from Omaha Westside. He will be signing with Nebraska here in about 20 minutes. Really appreciate him joining us. He's a super interesting one for me because of kind of what we asked him about there, and you brought up. He wasn't, like Caden Vermoss committed to Nebraska in 2023, in the spring of 2023. That's before his junior season even. He was on board for Nebraska and has been for the last 18 months. He'll sign today as well out of Millard North. That wasn't the case with Christian Jones. A lot of people thought he was an Oklahoma lean for a while. He certainly got a lot of attention kind of throughout the country. But once he locked in, obviously he's all Nebraska all the way.
I think that he also made a very interesting comment there, too, about the Tony White departure and all that. And maybe, I don't want to put us in the same generation, Ravi, but
you're a little younger than me.
The college football world that both of us know, love, and enjoy and grew up loving was a certain way. If coaches left, that was a big deal, right? That there was a reason why. But back in those days of recruitment, it felt like you were more tied to the school, the program, rather than maybe you were committed to a coaching staff because you weren't able to move around as easily. I think it's very interesting now that maybe the newer generation of college football athletes that are coming through recruitment have a better understanding of saying, listen, I'm going to commit where I think a program actually has a better suited scenario for me. The coordinators I can connect with, but realistically, they could move on as quickly as I want to move on. So everyone's kind of dealing with the free agency. But just like you said, too, with what Christian kind of went through in his recruitment process, there's a distinct difference to how Christian's in-state recruitment went for Nebraska comparative to many other in-state recruits over the past few years. Because how many times have we seen a Nebraska football coach, assistant, head coach, whoever, walk into any high school and just say, we'd love to give you a scholarship offer, and almost right then and there it feels like you see a commitment just to follow right after. That's nothing to say against the, priority of the athlete or what they're waiting for, but many student athletes in this state are just waiting for that opportunity for the head coach of the Big Red to call. Christian did his due diligence. He was wavering between two different schools and really was leaning, as you said, towards Oklahoma by all reports had looked like. So it's a good sign that if you had a recruit in state that had interest in Nebraska but was waiting for a significant turn to then make his commitment, I think you get the internal feeling that everything is pointing then back into the right direction, at least for Nebraska fans. And I know at the time when Christian committed, everyone had agreed that that's a turning point on the recruitment trail as well for Coach Rule. Yeah,
it's interesting, and I'll be interested to talk to a couple of the other guys today. Tyson Terry committed pretty early, who we'll talk to at 7:20. Jackson Carpenter committed fairly early as well, who we'll talk to at 7:30. But it's just interesting to me. I do wonder how much the mindset of some of these guys has changed, right? Because for a while there, it was, okay, if a guy's position group assistant leaves, then you worried about him transferring, because that's typically who he had the closest relationship with. That's usually who he had the most contact with throughout the recruitment process. And I wonder how many guys just look at it now as like, well, I can just follow my position coach wherever I want now, which is great. Or if they're more like Christian, where it's like, hey, we understand these guys are going to move on. You kind of have to pick a place where you're going to feel comfortable as long as either the head coach is there or that they continue down the path that you think they're headed on. Obviously, there's some places that have monumental changes and you're like, this probably isn't the right fit for me. But if you're at a place like Nebraska where you're like, okay, Coach Rules, you imagine he's going to be here a while, maybe some of the assistants change out, that hopefully Christian's mindset is the way of a lot of kids where they go, hey, this is just kind of what it is, right? Yeah. And coaches are going to move on, especially with Tony White. That's kind of the funny thing that over the last couple of days, obviously, I'm not thrilled Tony White's leaving. Like, he's a good football coach. Nebraska has to find a new defensive coordinator now. But it's always been kind of funny to me because no one expected him to be here after this year.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's funny how they act like the sky is falling even though the weather predicted it 2 years ago, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in the middle of his first season, it was almost a slam dunk guarantee. And even that conversation last offseason when there were rumors of him milling about with UCLA, San Diego State, where could he go? And then he got the associate head coach upgrade. He got a big pay raise. And now he's leaving, and everyone acts like, oh, man, what are we ever going to do without Tony White? Yeah. I think the difference is that it's because it feels like a lateral move to a team that had such a far underperforming season comparative to Nebraska that I think so many people are apprehensive about why he's leaving to that scenario.
Yeah, I think it's the how, not the what.
Right.
Which I get, you know, if
and you had made the good point about it earlier this week too, that, you know, the conversation about why he's moving is actually more interesting than the why he left. Right?
Yeah. Why he's moving to Florida State specifically. I will say, DB brought up a good point yesterday that there are factors here that we just don't know. Like maybe he just likes Florida. I don't know if he's got an attention or attachment to Florida at all. Maybe there's something maybe he's got family down there. I have no idea, right? Like, I don't know. You know, we got into the weeds on like Coach Satterfield's family situation and like, well, his wife lives back in South Carolina. It's like, okay, whatever, right? Like, I'm not in the weeds like that on Coach White and his situation. But maybe he's got family down there. Maybe he just likes it down there. You know, like we act like there's not other reasons people take jobs.
Yeah.
You know, I know a ton of people have taken jobs because they're like, I just want to move. I want to go somewhere else. Or, you know, maybe he's got attachments to some of the people on staff down there. We know Philip Simpson went down from Nebraska to Florida State last year. You know, there's a lot of reasons people take jobs. I don't know. From football, that's why I was trying to talk about football yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Because from a football standpoint, the only thing I can think of is the 3-3-5 maybe plays better in the ACC than it does in the Big Ten. The other thing I can look at here, because there was a ton of people in my DMs yesterday or in my mentions that were like, oh, well, he's doing this so he can be elevated to the head coach at Florida State. That is not going to happen.
Yeah, there's a
0% chance Tony White's the head coach at Florida State.
Listen, there's only a short contingency of Nebraska fans that are the loudest on Twitter that still want Bo Pelini to come back for defensive coordinator. Those things do not happen.
It's not
and all the times when I remember it was last year during the November stretch for Nebraska, it was during the losing stretch this year for Nebraska. So many of these these avatar profiles on Twitter and Facebook and all this stuff would just come out of the woodworks out of nowhere and would just say, oh, fire Rule, put Tony White as head coach. That does not happen. It does not work that way.
Well, and I understand that Florida State's in a tenuous position here. And I understand there's been times where you bring in a coordinator who you think you might like to elevate to the head coaching job. The problem is Florida State already did that with Gus Malzahn.
Yes.
Literally the other coordinator they hired this cycle is that guy.
Who you might argue, and you're more in touch with the Florida State fan base, but if they would have said, hey, you know what, Norvell, we're good. We're going to move on from you. If they would have just hired Malzahn outright to be their head coach, it would be 50-50, but I think they would probably be okay with a change.
Maybe. I think they'd be more okay with the change if Malzahn has a great year as offensive coordinator.
Right.
And then,
yes.
But if they had just done it this year, he hadn't been great at Central Florida the last couple of years, so I think there may have been some pushback there. But the fact is, you've got an experienced head coach who's been in national championship games, who has, across several schools and several stops, been a great offensive mind, one of the only people on the planet who could consistently beat Nick Saban. That's the dude that if they're doing a coordinator, head coach in waiting, think that's him, not Tony. I'm sorry.
Right.
I like Tony White. He's a great coach. I think he's going to be a good head coach someday. That's not what's happening at Florida State.
And you wonder, too, I mean, this was always a conversation and I remember we talked with whoever it was a couple of weeks ago that where is Tony White wanting to go? Because when the UCLA job was open, we knew that he was like a finalist, but how far did that go? Did he say no? Did they say, oh, you're not the candidate we were looking for? San Diego State was kind of the same way. Is he looking to maybe make that first high-profile, prolific Power 4 job right away as a head coach, if that's his career goal? Or does he not see himself as like that lower-tier group of 5 head coach where if he never wanted to be in that role, he just wants to elevate directly into –
like a Dan Lanning.
Yeah, exactly. Just continue to work your way up. This is a good move for that because you go be the Florida State defensive coordinator, you beat Clemson, you shut down a couple of high-profile ACC offenses, and
especially if you get
games.
The bounce back from this year.
Exactly.
Like that's going to be the optics of it. If Tony White can take this defense, which the defense wasn't actually terrible, the offense was abysmal, but the defense actually wasn't terrible. But if you can be, hey, I'm the new coordinator, we went from 2-10 back to 9-3. Then you can point to that as a thing you did, and it's dramatic, right? If you're at Nebraska and you go from 5 wins to 6 wins to 7 wins or 5 wins to 6 wins to 8 wins or whatever, that's not as dramatic of an improvement, and Matt Rule probably gets most of the credit there, right? So maybe that's it. Maybe he looks at the optics of it and says, hey, there's an opportunity for me to look, not that he's not going to do much, but to look like I've done a lot, because the optics and the reality sometimes need to match up as a coach in order to get the credit for the thing that you've done and the job you performed. So that's something I've thought about a lot over the last couple of days. But listen, I don't want to make any grand declarations here, but Tony White's not going to be the head coach of Florida State next year.
No. Regardless
Regardless of what happens, he will not be the head coach of Florida State next year.
That would be the most surprising.
That would
be the most surprising.
The only real surprising thing at this point of what's been going on. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
What is going to happen is we're going to talk to our guy Tyson Terry here from Omaha North. He'll be signing with Nebraska today as well. Tyson, how are you this morning?
I'm doing good this morning. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing really well. We appreciate you joining us. Congratulations on the big day. So what time are you signing today?
I'll be signing in around 9 a.m. this morning at North. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, I know you committed to Nebraska a while ago, but it's been a little bit of a hectic week. As somebody that's been on board and been in the class, how have you kind of processed some of the changes that Nebraska's going through?
It's kind of what, college football is nowadays. But just with me, I committed, to the university and, Coach Rule, that's why I'm signing today, regardless of how things shake out. I'm still going to be there, still going to be, fighting strong for, the Huskers, the state, still going to try and show out everything I can do. So, still staying strong and, still staying locked in.
Tyson, committing to Nebraska, I mean, that's probably a ringing endorsement for many people listening across the state right now. But who's been in communication with you the most over this past week? Like Ravi said, it's been hectic. Has it been Coach Rule, or has it been somebody else that's kind of kept you in the loop?
A lot of, I guess the recruits and signees, we were pretty communicate this week, I guess. A lot of guys, just asking around, but there wasn't too many coaches, I guess I would say, that, kept us in the loop. We kind of pretty much knew what, everything that was going on. Some recruiting coaches and, stuff like that, different coaches, calling in, asking, if everything's all right, this and that. And so, there's been a few coaches, but, nothing like too concerning.
Tyson, as you kind of look back at your time at Omaha North and the career you had, what's kind of your favorite moment from your high school career that you're going to, remember as you move on to this next chapter of your life?
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna remember my wrestling career. Gonna miss that. Gonna leave that behind in high school. And then I my football, that was just a passion for me. Friday Night Lights. That's always gonna be something I'm gonna miss. But I would say, overall, signing, that's a big thing for me. Committed, I guess, high school. But sports-wise, just gonna miss high school, I guess. But off to better things. So,
Tyson, committing to Nebraska, obviously a big deal for an in-state Cornhusker yourself. A lot of great defensive linemen, not only the past couple of years, but in Nebraska's history. Is there any that you're trying to emulate their careers as you start yours for the Big Red?
I'll be, I'll kind of, what Coach Knighton has told me is that I'll kind of be what Nash was, in the past couple of years, that interior, nose guard. So, just got to come ready to work, and just got to show up every day and, show who I am and get ready to bring back this black shirt defense.
I mean, you mentioned Nash. You sure you don't want to try the wrestling thing in college too?
Yeah, as of right now, I just plan on stopping after high school. But it's competition-wise, I don't plan on doing anything like that. Just maybe working out in the off season or something. But yeah.
Well, Tyson, we appreciate your time. Congratulations on a big day for you. And I won't totally close the chapter on wrestling. I'll just leave that open just a little bit for you. But we look forward to seeing you in Husker Red.
Yeah, sounds good. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. That's Tyson Terry from Omaha North. He is signing with Nebraska, as he mentioned, at 9 a.m. this morning. Coming up next, we're going to talk to Jackson Carpenter from Lincoln Southwest. He will be signing with Nebraska as well, and we will get to much more on National Signing Day, the transfer portal, coaching changes, all of it here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. 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 You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We're live on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. That's Austin Jacobsen. I'm Ravi Lulla here on the Pillar Exterior stage as we reach out to Jackson Carpenter here to talk to him about signing day. I want to remind you about Lawrence and Gardens and their Bright Lights event that they're having through the end of December. Make sure you get out to lawrenceandgardens.com to look at the hours, get tickets. DB and I went out there the other day. It's an incredible exhibit, and it is it's a really good time. You can make s'mores out there, which I didn't know people will use Reese's peanut butter cups to make s'mores.
Yeah, it's a cheat code. But I'm a traditionalist, so I don't want to get too crazy with my s'more.
We went out there, and I gotta say, I'm a fan of the Reese's peanut butter s'mores.
Okay,
you can choose your side as well if you're a traditionalist like Austin or a Reese's cup guy like me. Make sure you get out to Lawrence and Gardens. You can also, meet Santa if you got kids, or I guess you're an adult too. You want to meet Santa, that's fine.
Yeah, why wouldn't I?
There's a little igloo out there. You can ask for something for Christmas. Make sure you get to lawrenceandgardens.com for more info and for tickets. We will get to Jackson Carpenter here in just a second, and he is going to be signing. One of the things I like that Nebraska does, though, on signing day is, and I think other schools probably do this too, I just don't follow it that closely, is on their official account as guys come in and sign, they'll tweet out a highlight reel from their senior season, which is kind of fun. I like just getting the chance, because a lot of these guys I've seen, but some of them, like Sean Hammerbeck just came in from South Dakota. He just signed. they've got his highlights on there. It's just kind of a cool thing to get for fans to get to know these guys on another level that maybe you wouldn't have. It's more than just a name and a photo. You get a little glimpse into their game too.
Right. Yeah, and I've liked it in years past too when they've had a current Husker or a former pro Husker be able to break down some of the film and talk about like, oh, why this kid is exciting, why this is a good addition for Nebraska. I think those are all like really fun and really good stuff too. The Nebraska marketing is just, I mean, it's on top of its game constantly, especially for signing day.
Yeah, they do an incredible job. We really got to give our hat tip to them as their crew has been pretty on top of things under the Rule administration, at least. One thing that did come out yesterday that we should at least acknowledge, according to Chris Hummer of 24/7 Sports, he indicates that Dekel Shorts from Kentucky will be Nebraska's new wide receiver coach. Now, I know there were reports about Garrett McGuire. We don't exactly know whether he's going to still have a role on staff, whether he'll be moving on to different opportunities. But it does appear that Dekel Shorts will be, and I am told that's how it's pronounced, is Dekel.
Okay.
I know it's spelled a little differently.
Yeah.
I would not have guessed that pronunciation based on the spelling, but I am told it's Dekel Shorts from Kentucky, who is, if you're not familiar with him, he played for Dana at West Virginia, coached for Dana at Houston. One of his star pupils was Tank Dell at Houston, who had, I believe, 2,700 yards in the 2 years that he was there with Shorts as his wide receiver coach and Dana Holgerson as his head coach. That's a guy that Husker fans should be pretty excited about if that ends up being the case here. He's considered one of the best young position coaches in college football. The way it was described to me was, if you look at kind of the Mickey Joseph, Brian Hartlines of the world as the very top tier of wide receiver coaches, he's not in that group, but he's at the top of the next group.
Yeah, he's on the rising core, right?
He's ascending.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a great word. That's the word I was looking for. So it's too early for me to try to get into synonyms. But yeah, I thought the most important stat that would have came out, and this is so difficult with position coaches because obviously there's a lot of other things that go into it, but Holgerson's going to bring in a guy that he knows. One, knows the system. Two, was a player for him. And three, understands what he's looking for in the body type of receiver. So not only is Shorts going to be a guy that can develop receivers into the type of athlete that Holgerson wants them to be, but he also knows who he's looking for. And that includes maybe even some guys that could be signing with the Huskers later today.
Yeah, speaking of guys that'll be signing with the Huskers today, we've got Jackson Carpenter from Lincoln Southwest joining us now. Jackson, how are you this morning?
I'm good. How are you guys?
We're doing great. First of all, we appreciate you joining us. Congratulations on the big day signing with Nebraska. As somebody in your position, what does signing to Nebraska mean to you?
I mean, it's always been a dream of mine growing up here, and then my dad played here for 5 years. So, I mean, it's always been a dream, something I've been chasing, and being able to finally do it is a big relief, and I'm really thankful for the opportunity.
Jackson, you were a big piece of the Silverhawk program past couple of years. Do you have an idea of where you're going to be landing with Nebraska? You're kind of you're a fluid and great athlete, but is there a certain position or certain side of the ball that they're wanting you for?
Receiver.
Gotcha.
Jackson, as you go into your time at Nebraska, what's something you're looking forward to about developing your game with the Huskers?
I mean, they have a great group of coaches. Obviously some changes right now, but I trust Rule to make the right hires. But I'm excited to grow on the field, but also just as a man. I know that they have great people in the system that they'll help me grow as a person, player, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, then as a receiver in a new Dana Holgerson offense, you have to be pretty excited. You might be getting the ball quite a bit.
Yep, I'm looking forward to it.
Jackson, as you kind of look back at your time at Lincoln Southwest and throughout your high school career, is there a moment or a memory that sticks out to you the most from that time?
In high school, my sophomore year, my first game back from a little injury. I think it was like the third game of the year against East. My first game back, my first catch was a touchdown, so that was pretty cool and memorable. So I'd say that.
How cool is it just as a kid growing up in Lincoln, you get to play at Seacrest Field and now you move to Memorial Stadium?
Yep. I mean, I grew up going to watch all the kids at Seacrest play and just dream about playing at Seacrest, and then obviously watching the boys down at Memorial Stadium. So I've been around it. It's always been a dream of mine, and I'm excited to finally accomplish it.
Jackson, be honest here, with your dad being a former Husker, how much was he kind of pressing the thumb a little bit to try and make sure that you ended up in red?
He stayed out of it. He knew I'd make the right decision wherever I went, and he trusted me. But obviously, he thought it'd be pretty cool if I came here. But it was my own decision, and I'm glad I made it.
Jackson, we appreciate the time. Congratulations on a big day, and we look forward to seeing you as a Husker.
Thank you, guys.
That's Jackson Carpenter from Lincoln Southwest, legacy Husker. There was a bunch of those in last year's class. Obviously, got one in this year's class as well. And as you heard him, he'll be playing receiver, so he'll be working with Coach Shorts, who appears to be headed in to Lincoln from Kentucky as from Lexington to Lincoln. So
not bad.
Not a bad situation
Different
for
Lexington.
him at all. Yeah, not Lexington,
For our
Nebraska.
ESPN Tri-City listeners, did not come from the Minutemen.
No, he's a Silverhawk.
Could you imagine the fan outrage if they had hired an assistant coach from Lexington? No shame from the Lexington football program, but
if they had hired any assistant high school coach as the main wide receivers coach, I think there may have been a riot.
Yeah. People forget about Bob Wager.
Listen, I think it's a little different coming from Texas.
A little bit.
A little
just
bit.
A touch.
The high school scene is a little different down there. Although some would say perhaps a little overrated.
Oh, whoa. Did you say overweight?
Overrated. Oh, sorry. I was trying to read while speaking, which is a dangerous thing.
Very dangerous.
I can barely read while reading. So,
on this note as well, when we were talking with Jackson, there's a couple of in-state guys that are outside of the Omaha area that I think will be very interesting for Husker fans to watch, especially seeing when they'll be able to suit up. Obviously that redshirt year, their first year, more than likely, if they're going to be early enrollees, going to play in the spring game. But Jackson Carpenter and Connor Booth are going to be, I think, two of the bigger names that outside of the Omaha area, everyone's going to keep an eye on, especially Booth. I think everyone's going to be very excited to see where he fits in, if he plays just a traditional running back, if they move him around, because he is such a tremendous athlete, a tough player, and he was here last night as well. He won the Class C2 Football Player of the Year honor from Nebraska Prep. So obviously a kid like what we had heard from Christian Jones, that it seems like this is a class of just tough dudes, because you got a lot of multi-sport athletes. You got guys who have played both sides of the ball, and especially emphasis on the defensive side too. I think that's almost a key priority, that the mentality of this year's class seems different than what we've seen over maybe a decade's worth of classes from Nebraska.
Yeah, the guy we're going to talk to wrap up the show at 9:45, Tim Verghese, tweeted out earlier. He goes, this class has a lot of nasty guys in it in the best way possible, which I love to hear. That's what we love here. Coming up next, I think we actually have a minute to breathe to talk a little bit about what's been going on, not only yesterday, but this morning as well. That's Austin. I'm Ravi. We'll be back with more Hurrdat Sports Radio coming up next.
We will be back. be back. We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We're live on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. That's Austin. I'm Ravi here at Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill, where we're brought to you by our friends over at Game Day Men's Health. Make sure you get over to GameDayMen'sHealth.com to get your consultation set up, just like me and DB did, and we have been feeling great. DB just went back to get his 6-week blood draw recently to make sure all of his levels are starting to get in range. And they not only do that, they also make sure all of your other markers are healthy as well, because Game Day Men's Health is trying to make you the best version of yourself. Unlike some of these online telehealth places that are just trying to prescribe you some testosterone, they're really just trying to make you the best version of yourself. And I feel much closer to that now than I did 6 weeks ago when I started. Make sure you get over to GameDayMen'sHealth.com to set up your consultation as well. That's the Southwest Omaha location. As we continue through the day here with National Signing Day, also have transfer portal is wide open, as we've seen. It's we were talking off air. I think it was off air. I lose track sometimes about some of the departures that Nebraska's had so far in the transfer portal. And I got to say, the only one that's really surprised me so far is James Williams. That's one that, people are going to be upset about Prince Will because of the production we saw from him, the flashes of greatness we saw from him. But there's a reason we only saw flashes of it, right? Like, that was a guy that was being coached pretty hard, and from what it looked like, wasn't always in a place to receive that the way you would want him to. Otherwise, he probably would have been on the field more this year.
Yep.
James Williams is one where I think they took a lot of pride in finding him. I think they took he's one of those guys that I think Coach Rule, like, it's the James Williams of the world that I feel like Coach Rule does this for.
Yep.
Because that's a dude that just showed up to a camp. Nebraska's like, hey, we think there's something there. They developed him into an impactful Big Ten edge rusher out of nowhere, basically. Obviously, he had ability, but wasn't super productive at Iowa Western, kind of came out of nowhere, and Nebraska was able to mold him into this. I still wouldn't eliminate him coming back.
Yeah, right. And I think that's the open conversation about all of this, right? Just because someone has entered the portal does not necessarily mean that they are leaving the program. But I think the opposite side of the conversation is something that you've alluded to before, weeks and weeks ago, about Matt Rhule's transparency through the media. And I thought it was pretty telling in where we sit now that a few weeks ago he was openly bringing up the conversation more and more regularly about the 105-man roster scholarship, right? That he was saying tough decisions are coming, tough things are happening. He, being Matt Rhule, is maybe the best parent for Nebraska football in the sense that he's kind of telling you what's going to happen and trying to prepare you for the worst, right? He's trying to let you know, like, hey, the dog's getting older. It's going to get tough here soon. And I just want to let you know we have a tough decision coming up. Yeah. And I think he was preparing people for that conversation. Now, did it mean it was necessarily James Williams or Princewell or any of these other guys? I'm sure that there are some surprises to him too. I'm not saying that every single entry so far has been someone he's talked to, but I don't doubt that most of the guys that have entered the portal already for Nebraska, that so many people have already lit their hair on fire for, maybe already had these open conversations with the coaching staff saying, hey, look, there is younger talent coming up, or the best opportunity for you moving forward is to no longer be in this program. Because that's another thing Rhule has said very openly is that we want what's best for the players, and if it's not here, we want to get you somewhere that's going to be better for you.
Well, we saw it last year with Chief Borders, right?
Yes.
That's a guy that Coach Rhule loves that dude.
And still supports the program.
Yeah, and still talks to Coach Rhule, but he was a guy that got real minutes for Pitt this year. He was impactful for Pitt. That was a better fit for Chief Borders. Would Nebraska have been better with Chief Borders on their team? Probably, for depth and whatever reasons, but was that going to be the best opportunity for Chief Borders? No. Yeah. And so Coach Rhule encouraged him to move on, despite the fact that he loved him and because he wanted what's best for him. Like, that's the thing here that, okay, if you're talking about the high end of the number that Coach Rhule's talked about, which he has said 30 to 50 guys, right? Say you're talking about the high end of that number, closer to 50. That's a third of your roster.
Yep.
A third of your roster has to go.
Yes.
That's just the numbers. So you can't lose a third of your roster and not have anybody that was impactful, right? You might have guys that you're like, hey, this guy was impactful. I don't know that he's part of the future plans because, as you mentioned, some of the young guys coming up behind him. I think that's the case with a couple of the linebackers that went in, whether it's Bahe or Stephon Thompson. I think they, like you see Vincent Shavers coming up. You see Willis McGahee coming up. You see some of these guys that you're like, these guys are pretty close to catching me already. They're younger than I am. Maybe there's a better opportunity somewhere else.
And as fans, just in general over social media, it's somewhat humorous to think that if you showed them their own post from 3 weeks ago saying, well, why aren't the younger guys playing? We're in a losing streak. Why are you still committed to these older guys?
I mean, I said it.
And then now those guys are moving on because of maybe potentially younger talent coming up. Now it's the end of the world that they're no longer on the roster.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, like, I get being upset about losing some of these guys. Like, I would much rather prefer Princewell be on Nebraska's team and be ready to go and be an impactful player the way I think he can be. But I would much rather have Daniel Kalen stay at Nebraska, provide quarterback depth. But I also look at, okay, he's looking at Dylan and says, all right, that guy's probably entrenched here for a little bit. He's looking behind him. He sees TJ Lateef coming in this year's class and goes, okay, there might be better opportunities for me somewhere else, especially if Heinrich Haarberg stays. Like, okay, I probably won't be the primary backup again next year. And then I'm 2 years into college, and we're kind of burning the midnight oil here of my career. It makes sense for Daniel Kalen to move on in this situation. It makes sense for...
He was an SEC quarterback commit before flipping to Nebraska.
To Missouri. And Missouri's been in the playoff conversation 90% of the year, right? And then Michigan State was interested in him. That's another big, like he's had major power conference offers his entire time as a recruit. He's going to have opportunities. And, you know, if you're sitting behind a guy you think is going to be here for a couple more years, and then you've got another guy coming in behind you that you know they really like, and you're not the primary backup now because they have a veteran guy that they trust and want to get on the field, you look around and you go, hey, there's probably better opportunities for me other places, no matter how much I love it here or how much I want to be a part of what's going on. It's, to me, I think it's pretty much gone according to plan.
Yeah, I completely 100% agree. And I'm getting to the point where I almost have a copy and paste text message to friends, family, and acquaintances that will text me and say, what's going on? Should I be worried? And I just say, if you don't think that all of these things that are happening right now are already in place before we got to Monday, I think that we're kidding ourselves.
Yeah.
All of these conversations, all of these, I almost could guarantee were preemptive and were conversations far before we reached the end of the Black Friday game.
100%. And like I said, that doesn't mean you can't be upset about some of the guys leaving.
Yes.
What I think it does mean is this was inevitable. I think Coach Rule was trying to help give us a framework about what was going to happen because, but I do understand, like, your head can know, hey, there's going to be 40 to 50 guys that enter the portal. And when it actually happens, it's still a little jarring. You know, I don't know if I don't have a good example, but so there was, I had an ankle surgery in college, right? And they had to drill some holes in the ankle to anchor basically tendons down because they were too loose. And my doctor goes, hey, when you wake up, you're going to experience deep bone pain. And I'm like 20 years old. And I was like, Doc, I don't know what that means.
I've been hungover, but I've never had deep bone pain.
Yeah, I was
before.
like, what is deep bone pain? And he goes,
that's what I feel when when it gets too cold out and I can feel a storm coming.
Right. It's like, it's when my old man knee starts to act. No. And I go, you know, he goes, yeah, you're going to experience deep bone pain. I was like, does anyone have a frame of reference for that? Does anyone know what you mean when you say that? He's like, nah. And I was like, then why do you say it? He's like, I feel like you should be prepared.
Okay.
So I wake up, the anesthesia wears off. And what do you know? I all of a sudden have a very familiar reference for what deep bone pain is. I knew it was coming. Was I prepared for the reality of it? Not even a little bit.
Right.
I was not ready.
It's cold.
I feel like that's what's happening with the transfer portal.
And on the opposite side of this, remember that in a month or less time, when you start to see these guys pop up on Twitter saying, Nebraska offered as a portal entry, or Nebraska did this, or I'm committed and flipping from, you know, Syracuse to Nebraska, or wherever they're coming from, right? You have to have that frame of reference as well. Because as far as we want to jump into the deep end on one side of the transfer portal, it's almost more dangerous to jump in too far on the other side and just expect that every player that comes in is going to be the world breaker, game breaker that we have needed for so many games in a row.
And I will say, coming out on the other side of the deep bone pain, before, I'd roll my ankle like once a month. Like, it happened all the time.
Right.
Could not play basketball, tennis, anything without rolling my ankle pretty frequently. Now it's been 18 years since I had that surgery. I can count on one hand how many times I've rolled my ankle. So, yes, the deep bone pain, wildly unpleasant. On the back end, it's been a much better experience having gone through that. I believe that's where we'll end up with the transfer portal in Nebraska as well. We're in the deep bone pain phase of the transfer portal. We just have to get through to the other side, which was only about 2-3 months. Have to get through to the other side where we're in the, hey, my ankle actually feels a lot better after this surgery portion of the transfer portal. That's probably the strangest analogy you'll hear today.
No,
but that's
I'm in a medical household. All made sense to me.
That's what we're here for. Coming up next, we're going to talk to Brian Christopherson, Husker 24/7, see what his thoughts have been on a chaotic and hectic week for Nebraska football. That's Austin. I'm Ravi. We'll be back with more Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back will be back. We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio. Here is Husker 24/7 senior writer, Brian Christopherson.
Yeah, you got guys and walking into Ace Hardware without their shirts on.
Brian Christopherson.
We got a pretty good sewing circle in this state.
Brian Christopherson.
To me, it's like crunch time, baby.
Here is Brian Christopherson.
Ty Robinson's into the game now as Nebraska getting big here and getting very heavy. Dante Dowdell will be the running back again.
Well, they're huge. Look at this humanity.
It was not a timeout. They just reset this whole play. Nebraska breaks the huddle. Raiola under center. Turns, hands off Dowdell. Plunges into the end zone. Touchdown, Nebraska. What a drive for the Big Red. An exclamation point on what has been a wonderful first half here in Iowa City. 9-0, Big Red.
Kicking off hour number 2 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. That's Austin Jacobsen. I'm Ravi Lulla here at Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. We are joined now by Brian Christopherson from Husker 24/7. BC, what's going on, man?
Oh, not a lot. I'm by my old stomping grounds, Omaha North High School, to see Tyson Terry sign.
Very nice.
There
Very
you
nice.
go.
Hey, do you have arthritis yet from the amount of words you've had to type out over the past couple of days, or how do you recover from the amount of newsworthy items that have popped out since Monday?
No, it's been all right because you can just copy and paste a bunch of the portal stories and change the name, just insert name. So that hasn't been as bad. I always say I could actually have to work for a living, so it's always good for me. I'm sitting in a heated room. There's stuff coming, so be it, But yeah, it has been a crazy newsy time for Husker football, though.
Brian, let's start with the transfer portal, I suppose. Have there been any additions that have just straight up shocked you yet?
I'll preface it by saying nothing shocks me anymore in the portal era, because you just always have to be prepared that, oh man, okay, that happened, yeah. Mekhi Bear and Butler, I guess, stand out as like they're veteran guys who had given you a lot of quality snaps, and Bear in particular was a guy who really developed through the program. If people remember, like, he didn't even play his first 2 years. Then he popped up suddenly in the Rule era on, special teams. That first game against Minnesota, kind of took off as a linebacker, had himself a solid season. And I know he's got a lot of options on the table already by just saying he's going to enter the portal. So, I don't discount those departures, and I don't just, brush them off my shoulder or anything. But I guess those two stood out. Obviously, James Williams is a promising and has been a productive pass rusher. So I think that one hit people hard because they've kind of liked his story and all that. But to simplify, nothing has stunned me. Jamari Butler was up front like a week or two ago talking about coming back and getting his master's here. So we're just in a different world now. And of course there's a lot in flux with coaches and stuff like that. So you never know if there's an impact there.
BC, I don't want to get you in trouble. I don't want anyone to come after you from the Huskers or anything like that. But has there been anyone that you're surprised maybe did not enter the portal? Was there someone that maybe you had kind of the eyes on for, or someone, maybe parts of the roster you've been looking at that you're surprised haven't taken that jump in yet?
No, I wouldn't say that. There's definitely guys that, and I think anybody could name them, that you're like, protect them at all costs, like young players that, obviously start with QB1, but, Ja'Cory Barney and all those Miami kids, especially with some Nebraska staff, like having being down in Florida now, you always worry. It's a ways from Tallahassee to Miami. It's like 7.5 hour drive, but nonetheless, you're a little bit all hands on deck about some of those names. Cause you could go through every Miami kid that was a freshman this last year, and there was they either did something really well on the field or stuff was being said well about them behind the scenes. And so I'm not saying that to get people like all worried about them, but those are guys I'd want to protect, a lot. So, those are names that come to my mind. I didn't think they'd be in there. I just don't want to see them in there is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. BC, I know it may only be about 7.5, 8 hours from Tallahassee to Miami, but those are two entirely different countries. I don't know if
exactly. They are. I know that. I lived in Florida for like 7 months, and I learned that. Yeah, it is way different, but they do have some Miami influence developing on that Florida State staff, so you got to be aware of it.
Miami is like Miami, and Tallahassee is like Mississippi. It's like, I don't know how to explain it, but it's a whole different thing. And
I apologize to our Tallahassee listeners. I'm sorry you had to hear that.
No, it's true. Like, the Panhandle is wild.
Hey, from a guy from my Panhandle, all right? You relax now. I don't take Panhandle slander.
The Florida Panhandle is wild. BC, as we kind of go through, as you mentioned, some of the coaching changes and things like that, obviously Tony White goes down to Florida State, still kind of waiting on some other ones. But it seems like DeKel Shorts is going to be on staff working with the wide receivers. What do you know about him? I know he spent some time at Kentucky and also at Houston before that. How far have you gotten into the DeKel Shorts research?
Not a ton, but if Dana wants him, and then he should be here. I mean, Dana Holgerson's got to pick the guys that he feels work best with him. And, I'd add to this through our reporting, Garrett McGuire's still over there. It could be a revised role, or maybe there'll be something else elsewhere that pops up, and you'll have to consider that. But I like the hire. of shorts on the surface, because, you know, he worked with Dana at Houston, and he worked with Kendeigh, who was a very, very good player and is in the NFL already. And people might remember Holgorsen was asked about Ja'Cory Barney like a week or two ago, and he was mentioning Kendeigh and like how there's a comparison point there. And so go back to the question I just answered about keep those Miami kids at all costs. I would hope that a guy like Ja'Cory Barney is kind of excited as he gets to know shorts, is like, okay, he did work with this guy I was just compared to, who was a 3rd-round draft pick, is doing really well in the league. Let's play this out with these guys because they might know what they're doing with a guy like me. So I think even though he's a younger coach, he's done enough that I think he'll grab some guys' notice right away. And he's definitely an up-and-comer in this business. There's no question about it. His name was not new to me because we put out a 30 for 30 list and every year on 24/7 Sports, and he was on it. And so I always kind of know some of those guys. So a lot of times with an assistant coach, I might have to Google him. It's like, okay, who is this guy? I actually knew the name. I didn't know everything about him, but I was like, okay, I know that one. So that right away kind of had me with the idea that he'd be here.
BC, when it comes to just the addition of some of the offensive staff, when it comes with Holgorsen making these hires, there's always been that conversation about finding Rhule's guys that Rhule has worked with before, has a relationship with, and his relationship with Holgorsen was, you know, not necessarily flimsy, but felt like they had maybe crossed paths or were in the same room at the same time. Do these new offensive hires need to follow that same pattern? Or is it more of Holgorsen's guys that he's going to be able to bring in as he sees fit?
Yeah, I would say it's more the guys Holgorsen sees fit. I think, Matt Rhule's going to have a say on everything. I don't want to say otherwise, but I think he's going to have a lot of faith in a guy who has had the resume that Dana's had, you know, coaching offense and being a head coach for 13 years. And I think the biggest deal about Holgorsen returning also is those two can be sounding boards off each other. Like it's sort of rare company when you actually have guys who have sat in the captain's chair for more than a decade as a head coach and experience all the ups and downs and the things people don't even know about that go with that job. And so I know people are like eager to see what Dana can do with like a full runway with the offense. But Monday's news of him returning to me was as big that those guys can use each other now, to help each other through some things. And, okay, this is happening. What would you do here? What do you think about this? And I would hope that's a part of the process because, Dana was 92-69 as a head coach. So a lot of guys would like that record. And he had his share of success. So he's a good guy to spin some ideas off of.
BC, switching to the other side of the ball in terms of hires, obviously the search for a new defensive coordinator is well underway. Are there some names that pop into your mind that you say, hey, I'd like to see this person get a phone call or I'd like to see this person end up at Nebraska?
No, I don't have anyone in particular I would just mention like that. Obviously I know the in-house name that, like, if you've laid like betting odds and if a place in Las Vegas put it down, they'd probably put John Butler near the top just because of his like resume that's pretty deep. And people will remember the interview he gave. I think it was with The Athletic when he left the Buffalo Bills. Like, I want to be a head coach or a coordinator, basically, is what he said. I'm paraphrasing, but that was it. So certainly he's a guy that you think about. I just think sort of like I mentioned, Dana as a sounding board. I know Phil Snow is that for Coach Rhule. And Phil Snow's going to be 69 in December, and I'm not saying yay or nay if that means that he'd still be interested in coaching. If he is, maybe that's a possibility. But even if he's not, I think he's somebody who Matt Rhule trusts so much. They would certainly have discussions like that guy could fit well here in this league because of these reasons, and they could probably lay it out pretty well. And so it could be somebody out of left field. Nobody was talking about Tony White when he got this job 2 years ago. You know, he was a name that was out of the blue to us. So I'm totally aware or thinking of the possibility that Matt Rule could throw us a little bit of a curveball here.
On that same note, is there more of a probability that the next defensive coordinator for Nebraska football is closer in terms of scheme to Tony White, or do you think it could be someone that has a better fit with what Matt Rule wants, with the expectation of his program and what he's hoping to build?
I think, we get so caught up in like the labels. All of us outside the walls usually do. Like, okay, remember when Tony first got here, the 3-3-5, and we were so enamored and breaking it down and looking for every little piece of info we could have on it. I think the biggest thing about Tony's defense and what makes him a successful coach for the most part is how bendable his scheme is. And so you saw that with how they could fluctuate, how many D linemen were, they played. And there were certain games where even Matt Rule had some suggestions, like maybe let's go a different route with how many down linemen were playing or switching it up. So I think you're looking for somebody who has a track record of flexibility. Maybe they have, yes, this is my base scheme. I run a 3-3-5. I run this, I run that. But you see off of it how it branches out and how they've done different things when faced with different tests. Because we have to think about, we're no longer in a world where you're in like a 10-team league. You're in an 18-team league. And, there used to be like even a decade ago, we'd talk about like, oh, this is a Big Ten style offense. This is a Pac-12 offense. Remember, we'd get into all that. They sort of had like a theme around those type of offenses. That's no longer the case. There's so much, diversity about what you're going to see each week, just even within your league. So you've got to have a defensive mind that I think can match wits with that and know that I could see something in Big Ten play that is completely different on a game that's on October 7th compared to October 14th. And this is how I would adjust to that. So I think that's what you have to look at most of all.
We're talking with Brian Christopherson, Husker 24/7. BC, kind of, trying to take a little bit of a step back from the events of the past few days. If you were to kind of rank what storylines you're looking at the most between now and the bowl game, what are you kind of focusing on the most?
The thing I wrote Monday, and this is the first part today, and I think they're doing a good job of it, is you have to hold serve with your recruiting class. I think people's stomachs were in knots, with the news coming so close to signing day. We're in such a weird time where the season just ends. Okay, your coordinator leaves, and it all just rubs up against one another where now it's signing day. And so you're trying to make sure you keep all the kids. It seems like they're going to do a pretty good job with that. Malcolm Simpson told us he was going to sign with the Huskers, and so that's one I'm hopeful of. So that's like my storyline of the day. Did they hold serve there and not let the news of the last 48 hours really wreck what could be a top 20 class? After that, the portal opens for real in a few days. And so there is going to be more. And it's just like, can they keep the guys you really need to keep? Like you are going to lose a guy who's played some snaps for you here or there, which we've already seen that. But you got to keep certain guys. I mentioned some of those Miami guys. Obviously, Raiola, you got to make sure he's around. Those are the things I watch. And then obviously the D coordinator and what sort of staff adjustments are coming there. This is going to be a fascinating press conference at 1:00. It's kind of unfortunate because usually respect is properly given to the recruiting class itself, and most of the questions are about that. There will be some of that, but there's been so much news that honestly we have to dive into some other topics with Rule today, and it's just going to be interesting what he says. How does he feel about guys who have said publicly, I'm going to go in the portal? Could they come back? What's he say about his staff as it sits right now? There's some interesting answers around the corner in about 4 or 5 hours.
The past few years, Nebraska fans have gotten so used to being at this point of the college football season that coaching changes, transfer portal additions or losses usually just mean preparing for next year, but there's still a bowl game to go to. How many of those questions have to be answered for Matt Rule in this moment? Because we talk about the long-term goal of hiring a defensive coordinator, but you don't have a defensive play caller on staff.
Yep, you got to answer that. And the D-line is a real thing. I mean, there's some pieces there that won't be there. Obviously, Ty has said he wants to play in it. I know Nash has been dealing with a knee, so we'll see what happens there. But you worry sort of about attrition at maybe certain spots, and D-line could be one of them. And then you've got this fascinating, I'm not saying any of these kids are going to play, but Christian Jones, who you guys I know interviewed today, can practice in bowl games. So this is a unbelievable time. But you're right. He's got to answer some of those questions about this is who's calling the defense. This is our direction for this month at least. And we'll see if he confirms his wide receivers coach too, and maybe some staff adjustments. So I don't know if he's ready to do all that, but that's sort of the weird cocktail of a press conference we're about to have at 1:00. That's probably different than any signing day press conference I've ever been a part of.
Yeah, BC, it kind of seemed like you you thought this here, but have you feel like we've kind of forgotten about there is another football game that's going to be played?
What's that?
And do you feel like we've kind of forgotten there is another football game that's still to be played this year?
Yeah, we have. That's why they need to get through today and hold serve with this class. Hopefully the portal noise for now kind of trickles down. Obviously, there's going to be more in the next week. And then Sunday, you get that official announcement. And I do think that will do good for a lot of people just to see Nebraska against this team in this spot. There is a game. It is really happening. Plan accordingly. That is going to be a big deal, I think, just psychologically to actually have the specifics in front of us in this case. But you're absolutely right. I think people right now are distracted for other reasons. And it is different because a lot of programs, frankly, if they were 6-6 and they're going to a bowl game, it is sort of so what now? That would be their mindset. But around here, we've made such a thing about it because it's been 8 years. There is this eagerness for that game, and yet you have to balance it with all this big picture stuff. So the exciting part is, and I'm hoping when the portal opens for real, Nebraska can keep a lot of the young offensive guys, and it looks sort of the same. We get some extra time with Holgerson with those guys, and you get to see what that looks like, in a bowl game. So that could be something where they could really iron out some wrinkles maybe with some extra practices. So that part could be something, if people are looking for positives, that could happen.
The bowl game appearance is probably the bigger deal in the main course of the season and where Rule wants a projection of this program to go. But is there pressure to get the bowl win as well? Or do you get the sense that everyone's let's just make sure we get through these next few weeks and we're going to celebrate the bowl appearance and the success we've had this year and then get ready for the next step? Obviously, they're going to play the game. They're going to try to compete. But is there pressure to get the win itself?
I don't think there's any added pressures. I think let's put it this way. I think there's been more pressure on some games within the regular season than there will be on that one. That said, you're going to either have a winning season or a losing season based off of that result. It would be nice for Nebraska to spin that forward hey, they had a winning year. 7 wins is better than 6. You got to take what you can get. And I think guys have to really I do think the guys who are here are going to go all out for it. And that could be an advantage Nebraska has in that game. We'll see who they play and what their motivation is on the other side. But I do think once we actually get to the practices with the guys that are on the roster right now, Nebraska will be enthused to play in the game. And that sometimes is the settling factor in those. You guys will remember, this is a little ways back, but Pelini had a team that went, was it the Holiday Bowl? He got situated against Washington in a rematch where they played for the 3rd time in 2 years. Mm-hmm. And Nebraska had creamed them in the regular season. Nebraska was not excited to be there. Washington was under Sark at the time, and Nebraska took it on the chin against kind of a mediocre to bad Washington team. So I think enthusiasm is everything in those bowl games, and I do think Nebraska will have it once we actually get to, okay, here it is, and these guys are involved. I think, and you're going to get some young players who get their first real chance too, I think, and that's going to be exciting.
That's Brian Christopherson, Husker 24/7 BC. We appreciate the time as always. Hope you get a sleep at some point this week.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks a lot, guys.
That's Brian Christopherson, Husker 24/7. For those of you keeping track, Michael Terry did commit to Texas. There was some late hope that he may end up at Nebraska, but was ultimately too much to pass up the in-state school there with the Longhorns. So
they are number 2 in the country.
Yeah, he's the number 1 athlete in the country. Texas is number 2. Nebraska very much was in that one, just was a little too much to overcome for the in-state. And honestly, if that's one where I do wonder if Nebraska had gotten a couple more wins this year, I think that's one they might have got.
Yep.
If they're sitting at 8 wins right now instead of 6. I don't think that's the case with most of these recruits. I do think with Michael Terry that mattered.
I think that's always been part of the recruitment conversation, though, right? And it was, excuse me if I get was it James Palmer, the lineman from a couple of months ago that had the big recruitment visit that Raiola drove out to Omaha to pick him up for?
Oh, David Sanders.
James Palmer. Did I go Nebraska ball there?
Yeah, I think you did.
Oh man,
I think you did.
See, I'm just pulling names out of everywhere. But yeah, there's a limit to the guy that ruled once in his recruitment philosophy, but there's also the thought of, if we can get a top-level guy, we go get that guy.
Yeah, 100%. So, yeah, that's the latest news, Michael Terry to Texas. But, hey, it's the transfer portal era. Maybe he ends up in Nebraska in a year or two anyway. We'll be back with Andy Kendy from KETV on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back. 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 Welcome to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We're back here on Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. That's Austin. I'm Ravi. We're here on the Pillar Exterior stage and joined now by Andy Kendy from KETV. Hey, K, what's going on, man?
What's up, fellas? I'm walking out by Mustang Plaza in the parking lot at Millard North, just having watched signing day.
What a wonderful treat that was probably for you to be at Millard North. Just a great place. I hear everybody has a good time there.
It's really a nonstop party, isn't it?
Nonstop party at Millard North. Yep, that's what the people say.
But isn't it like, okay, what works out for me? My daughter goes to Millard North. She's a freshman there. Hey, you know what? I'll do Millard North this morning. And let's just say, good thing I did, because I cut it probably right at the buzzer. So
nice.
It was cool, though. It was a good deal. It was a good deal.
Yeah, obviously you've got a couple future Huskers there. You got a future Wyoming Cowboy there as well, and Henry Rayberg. How was signing day with the Mustangs?
It was cool. It was good, and unique that they have multiple Husker commits. And I thought the most interesting thing that we talked to both Pierce and Caden after, and both of them, talked a little bit about Tony White from what they knew, about his departure and what to expect. But, Caden is kind of Verghese is kind of one of the ringleaders. Like right after the news breaks, he's out texting his guys to try to keep his fellow recruits on board and the whole bit. And, both of them alluded to that they are, committed to a school, not necessarily position coach. And while it wasn't the greatest news, they're still all Nebraska moving forward. But the cool thing, both guys are going to early enroll. Both guys are hoping to go through some sort of bowl practice. And both guys told us that they're hoping to go to the bowl. So think about that. Pierce Blueberry, Caden Verghese has been in Husker for 2 weeks, and they're going to the same bowl that Ty Robinson's been waiting for 6 years to go to.
That's actually a little mean if you kind of think about it. I mean, if Ty Robinson was 18 again, he'd be like, "Yeah, I would travel to any bowl game that I could possibly go to. That'd be wonderful." But AK on the Nebraska recruitment side too, when it comes to just this class in general, Ravi and I had mentioned a little bit just about the mentality. It feels like this is a tough group of kids. And you were there locally with the Millard North group. Do you get that sense as well, just maybe even from the local in-state kids that Rules recruited, that maybe it's building the program first with toughness and then bringing in the talent with it as well?
I do think there's a character element to this call, and would be a good way to describe to the kids on it or in the class. Think about the other kids like the Christian Joneses of the world, the Tyson Terry, who's going to be signing a little later on this morning, and even a guy like Connor Booth. These are tough kids. They're winners. They're locals, and they really want to set the path and the trajectory of this, keep moving it forward. And I think that's I've been through enough of these to know that usually the stuff is pretty cyclical. It's pretty standard stuff. They say pretty much the same things, but for whatever reason, this year seems a little different. Maybe it's just the blend of kids that they have and the type of character, in terms of toughness, in terms of their mindset going forward. Maybe this one's a little different. I know Husker fans would hope so. I just marvel at these kids who are seniors in high school, willing and wanting, and they can't wait to get going, and they're ready to go leave high school in the second week of December to go to Lincoln to start practicing for, a season that won't start for another 9 months. That's pretty impressive.
Andy, as obviously there's been a lot going on with Nebraska football in the last few days, but it's a pretty busy time of year for a lot of the other sports as well. Obviously, the NCAA volleyball tournament starts off this week, and then you've also got just a little number one matchup at the CHI tonight. How are you spending your week?
I'm spending at least my day working, which is funny because Sunday and Monday, I was like, I need to tap out. I need a couple of days to go nonstop since July, so we had everything covered. But poor Matt Tilly on Monday, everything that was breaking on Monday, he was like, oh my God. And another thing, the hits just kept on coming. Monday was like an unbelievable news cycle for him to deal with. But yeah, today is Lauren will be at Kansas and Creighton. Matt Tilly's doing signing day with me in the morning, and we'll be anchoring today. And then obviously volleyball gets kicking with Creighton and Nebraska. Hopefully both teams will get through this weekend. I think they will, and then we'll take our chances next weekend in a friendly programming reminder. So that's a week from Sunday, the regional finals, which is the match to get to the Final Four, will be on ABC for the first time in the afternoon. So watch it on KETV. We don't know if it's going to be Nebraska, but it could be. So we'll have to keep our schedules peeled. And then obviously the final is on ABC on the 22nd. The Final Four matches, the semifinals, will be on ESPN. That's the Thursday prior. So there you go. There's my plug.
Yeah, Andy, I was telling Ravi just off air a moment ago that it's almost a shame and a crime that we have all these big stories and all of these football headlines when there's a pretty significant basketball matchup happening tonight.
Yeah. I'm like, can't we save some of this news to second week of January? But that's not how it works. But yeah, this is whenever you get the number one team in the country coming to town, that's a big deal, especially when it's a non-conference bowl like Kansas, and they're going to bring their Jaysker fans up, or their Jayhawk fans coming up. Can I say Jaysker? Maybe that's a different. It's Jayhawk. Yeah, so it's going to be an interesting deal tonight with all the Kansas fans coming up because they'll get in the building. There'll be a raucous atmosphere. I expect nothing less. And hopefully Creighton is healthy enough that they can really put out their best product because they've been banged up lately.
Mm-hmm. Well, Andy, as I'm sure you know, the original Jaysker was actually Kansas and Nebraska fans, not Creighton and Nebraska fans. So it's really the JJ Hawksker. Is that what we're doing today?
I just like the JJ.
Maybe. Yeah. That could be double JJ. Yeah, JJ Sker. That's good. I like that.
The JJ Skers, watch out. They'll be out in full force tonight for Nebraska or for Creighton and Kansas.
Andy, you mentioned obviously volleyball. Want to pick your brain on that. Clearly most of the state's going to be rooting for Nebraska to try to make it all the way past that regional final and further and beyond into the Final Four and championship, hopefully. But is there a chance with how the bracket laid out that you see maybe a greater chance for Creighton to break through more than Nebraska, just due to the toughness of who's in both regions?
Well, I don't know if one team has a better shot than the other, but I do think that this is Creighton's best chance, I think, that they've had since they've been up to this level of national prominence. I think they have the team to do it, and I think there's a number of factors. Matchups is one thing, and their road is obviously not easy because once you get to this point, everybody is awesome. So, and the fact that they would have to travel to, Happy Valley wouldn't be the ideal situation, but it is what it is. And I think that on any given night they could knock off Penn State. I'm really intrigued to see if that materializes, and can't wait to see them get there. Obviously, they got 3 matches to get through before we get to that point. But I think from Nebraska, the thing that jumps out at you is the possibility of having a Wisconsin-Nebraska regional final. Now, I know Nebraska swept the Badgers in both matches this year, but I think to have that match with the Final Four on the line would just add another chapter to that rivalry, which is, I think, unparalleled in college volleyball, at least in 2024.
That is Andy Kendy from KETV. AK, we appreciate it as always, and I hope at some point you get to take a little breather.
Well, thanks, boys. It will be fun. Just get us to Christmas or after the bowl game, whenever and wherever that is.
Let's say January 1st, just to be safe. Just give us a little time.
There you go. Yep.
AK, we appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, boys.
That's Andy Kendy from KETV. Good stuff there from AK.
What do you think will be a bigger day in Nebraska, the Nebraska football bowl game or Christmas?
Probably the bowl game.
Yeah,
definitely.
If they're on the same day, that's a shame. Nebraska fans deserve both. They need 2 Christmases this year.
We get Christmas every year. We don't get a bowl game every year. So
Santa hasn't skipped for 8 years.
Yeah,
in the
so
state.
I do think at least for this one year that that the bowl game will take precedence over Christmas. But no, it's a fun week here in Nebraska. You mentioned it, as you said off air. There's a lot going on. Both volleyball programs will be underway. Creighton, I believe, is tomorrow. Nebraska is Friday. So it's nice that they staggered them for us.
Yeah, that was kind of nice, wasn't it?
But really big week for volleyball in this state. And then obviously all of the Nebraska football things going on, and Creighton and Kansas tonight, where we'll have a whole crew out at Hurrdat Sports for that one as well. So we'll have you covered there. Speaking of having that one covered, our guy Nick Bahe, the only person I know that's been to both schools.
The original JJ.
The original JJ Skur, as it were, with his family being Huskers as well. We'll talk to Nick Bahe coming up next. I wonder how torn he is today about his allegiances. We'll get into it coming up next year on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio. Now, college basketball analyst for FS1, host of the Nick Bahe podcast, and former Creighton and Kansas basketball guard, Nick Bahe.
Man down, man down.
Nick Bahe.
I open up some salsa, explodes all over my chest.
Nick Bahe.
Meet me at the rim.
Here is
Old Dominion.
Nick Bahe.
Wrapping up hour number 2 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. That's Austin. I'm Ravi. We are joined now by the one and only Nick Bahe. Nick, how are you this morning?
Great. Kansas is in town playing Creighton. I mean, come on.
I gotta ask, man. Like, I know, like, are the emotions exploding out of your chest right now with Kansas and Nebraska, or Kansas and Creighton here?
Yeah, a little bit. I don't know if it'll fully hit me until like the jump ball tips and Coach Self is on the sidelines and all those Kansas guys are on the floor. Just because it seems 15 years ago, it seemed insane. The idea of Kansas coming to Creighton seemed just absolutely insane. I remember when Danny Manning was an assistant coach at KU. I remember asking him, I'm like, hey, man, when I was at Creighton, I was like, hey, man, what's it going to take to get the Jayhawks to come to Creighton? And he gave me that. He hit me with this. He went, psh. he hit me with that one. He started beatboxing me like, come on, like the hell freezing over, like there's no way Kansas would come to Creighton. But here we are, 2024. Yeah, I'm excited. Obviously, my connection to both programs has made me really fired up for this one.
Nick, have you been able to present the Nick Bahe Trophy for this rivalry that's going to start brewing? I assume that when Creighton tries to storm that puppy later tonight, that you'll just present the winning trophy to whichever side.
Yeah, I need to think about what that would be. I don't know if it's just like a jar of salsa exploding onto a person, or I don't know. I'll have to figure out what that trophy needs to be. But yeah, listen, I'm all for making this an annual thing and just creating some silly trophy just to please me, because it's all about me, clearly, I guess.
Nick, we appreciate you indulging a little bit of our silliness here, but I am curious about Creighton as you kind of look at this one. Obviously, the players the players era tournament didn't necessarily go the way Creighton had hoped, although I thought they played pretty well against a good Texas A&M team, even though they didn't come out on top on that one. What is different about this team from maybe where you thought they'd be to start the season?
Oh, man. They're not shooting it as well as I thought. I mean, I think they were, when you always think of Creighton, you think of three-point shooting, but this team in particular has a lot of guys that if they're not making shots, it's somewhat of a problem. I mean, you look at I was looking at the Isaac Trout, Mason Miller, and Jackson McAndrew. Those three guys.
Mm-hmm.
80 of their 106 shots are threes. That's 83% of those three guys' field goal attempts are threes. Like, so it's pretty clear what they're doing right now and what their strengths are, and that's shooting a three. And all of them have had moments outside of Mason Miller, who I think is just in a little bit of a slump, but he can shoot the ball. But it's just when you are a team that is built from the 3-point line and you're not shooting it great, there's gonna be a domino effect in that. This team's Jemiah Neal is still finding himself. Pop Isaacs is still finding himself, but there's not a Baylor, Sharman, Trey Alexander guys that could just at will go get in the lane and go get their own. It allows for the teams to collapse a little bit more and send more guys at Kalkbrenner. So I guess, I had my concern. This was far from a perfect team heading into the year. No team really is. I had my concerns about the backcourt to a certain extent heading into the season. Just felt like a little shorthanded there. But the most surprising thing to me is just how Creighton has shot the three. They're shooting 31%. That's 241st in the country right now. That's been the most surprising thing, just because that's how this roster is kind of built.
Yeah, Nick, you mentioned the shooting struggles, and then you also brought up, I'm glad you brought up the lack of a Trey Alexander or a Baylor Shireman, right? Creighton's kind of in this weird spot where you don't have the guys to get into the lane to kind of relieve some of that pressure off the shooting, and then you're also not shooting the ball well. What is the solution there offensively for Creighton because I'm not sure they've got that guy on the roster that can just go get themselves and create a shot the way a Baylor or a Trey could. So it kind of feels like the only option is to start shooting better. Is there another option in your mind?
Yeah, I hate to be. I know some people get annoyed when coaches. It's almost like a joke for people. They're like, a coach is like, we got to make shots. It's like, well, duh. But everybody can say that. But I do think in this situation, the number one thing that needs to improve, or the remedy for the situation, is they do have to shoot it better. That you have to establish that. Sometimes you do have to state the obvious. I do think also this group, I think this group's good in transition. Like I think Jemiah Neal in particular is electric. I mean, when he is flying down the floor and and running the wing, and he gets an advanced pass from Ashworth, he is really tough to stop going to the rim. I think transition is a good place for this group to find themselves a little bit. I do, it's hard because Pop Isaacs and Neal can get into the lane. It's just then what happens when they're there. Pop Isaacs is just a little bit smaller, so it's maybe a little bit harder for him as it was for a guy like Trey Alexander or Baylor Shireman to make a play. I will say Pop Isaacs has better passing instincts than I anticipated him to have. Like at times he'll make like a really good feel play in the paint, seeing the weak side help and maybe kicking it opposite or dropping it down to Fred King or Kalkbrenner. So I do think there's potential there for Neal and Pop Isaacs to continue to get in the lane and make things happen. I think the other thing too, Ravi, and I'm sure you're gonna ask me about Kalkbrenner. They need to. I almost think the first couple of games they got lulled into a false sense of security of like Kalkbrenner's not Edey. Like he's not built to just throw the ball into the post and he just plays with his back to the basket. He doesn't necessarily have a bag of moves where he can go to. Like where Kalkbrenner's elite at is scoring off the move, off the catch, off a diagonal screen, off a pick and roll, running the floor. They need to figure out different ways to get him on the move to catch and finish, because I think that's still where he's at his best. I think the UTRGVs of the world that just played dead behind him, didn't send a double, allowed Kalk to get deep post position, maybe lulled them into a false sense of security of just like, oh, you could just treat this guy like he's Edey or whoever and just throw it into him. I'm certainly not saying to not throw it into him. I'm just saying that while he's a really good scorer and his numbers indicate that, he's a little bit different kind of a post scorer than I think maybe some people conjured up in their head when they've watched him score 49 points, if you will.
Working on the note of Kalkbrenner, between him and Ashworth, of course, everyone kind of leaned on those two guys to propel Creighton if they were going to have the season success that they've had the past few years. Which of those two need to play above their maybe potential or average tonight if they're fully healthy to be able to pull off an upset?
Well, this is maybe a little bit of a maybe some of this is your answer is relative to what you expect their baseline to be.
Mm-hmm.
Like if Kalkbrenner plays, I expect him to play at an elite level. So I would probably, there's no question that Kalkbrenner's the MVP of the team and the guy that really elevates them. But I would say Ashworth. I think without Stephen Ashworth's ball handling, because Kansas is going to dial up some pressure, it'll be interesting to see what Coach Self does in terms of putting DeJuan Harris on him or whoever. And I mean, DeJuan Harris was the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year 2 years ago. He's not good. He's great on the ball. So he's going to have to handle the ball. He's going to have to make shots. We talked about how they need those 3-point shooting numbers to increase. So I would say that Ashworth is the guy that probably needs to play at a little bit of a above level, if you will, tonight, given the matchup.
Nick, I'm curious who you've been most surprised by in terms of outperforming what you thought they'd be coming into the season. We mentioned Jemiah Neal earlier. Yeah. I also want to ask about Ty Davis, because I'm not sure. I certainly, at least, didn't expect him to be this much of a factor early.
Yeah, I don't know if the coaching staff really had a good sense of what things would look like. You know, sometimes with freshmen, sometimes they hit a wall early, and sometimes they make these leaps in like a week or 2 weeks, and you're like, whoa, okay, this guy went from we can't play this guy in a real game to like, no, this guy can hang in there. I think Ty Davis has done a good job of staying within himself and playing hard, which I think is sometimes really challenging for young players to do, because they think, well, I've been the man my whole life. This is another basketball game. I'm just going to come in here and foot on the gas and attack, and that's not necessarily the situation. I know this sounds weird because he was highly touted, but I think Jackson McAndrew has been better than I thought he was even going to be. Seeing him, he's one of those guys that I'm talking about that has made these really big leaps. I was worried with him that just from a physicality standpoint, he just wasn't going to be able to hang in there at this level right now. But he's done a better job of fighting. I mean, there was a play against Texas A&M where he went to block out Washington, and Washington literally sent him 5 feet flying. So he's always still somewhat swimming in it. But I really like Jackson McAndrew, guys. I think he's going to be a really, really good player. I think he's more. I illustrated those 3-point shooting numbers, but I also think he's more than that. Like, I do think he's got some ability to put the ball in the deck a few times or score in different ways. I just love his confidence. That guy, I saw it in that Purdue exhibition game where it was like this guy stepped on the floor against a team that played the national championship game a year ago and was totally cool and calm and confident. So even though Jackson McAndrew had a lot of he was highly touted coming in, I think he's been a little bit better than I maybe anticipated him to be.
That's Nick Bahe. He's a college basketball analyst and, of course, host of the Nick Bahe podcast. And can't forget about Schick and Nick as well. Nick, we appreciate you joining us. Hopefully we can catch up again soon and find you in a place where you're not so conflicted, where you're not a house torn upon itself. I hope you enjoy the game tonight, Nick.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you.
That's Nick Bahe. You can find him, Nick Bahe Podcast, also over at Shoot 360 in Lincoln. Coming up next, we've got Mitch Sherman from The Athletic to talk more Nebraska football.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio. Now, gas station coffee enthusiast and Nebraska writer for The Athletic, Mitch Sherman.
It's great to see you. It's been since a cold day in the corner of Memorial Stadium.
Mitch Sherman.
I wrote that down because I'm going to use it in life.
Mitch Sherman.
It's not something that you generally hear, and it's certainly not something that you see put into action.
Mitch Sherman.
It's a lot more rare than you might think that they actually say it in the way that he says it and then go do it.
Here is Mitch Sherman.
Kicking off hour number 3 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, KFOR in Lincoln. That's Austin. I'm Ravi. We are joined now by Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Mitch, how are you this morning?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
We're doing all right. Before we get into it, in case people didn't hear, Cortez Mills has flipped from Oklahoma to Nebraska. So Nebraska goes 1 for 2 on high-profile receivers this morning. Not the worst thing in the world. Mitch,
absolutely not.
As we kind of get into this, I'm curious. I know recruiting's not your main beat, but like how deep do you get into these recruiting classes and things as you kind of cover Nebraska and the big picture of where this program's headed?
Well, it's kind of my history. It's kind of my background.
Yeah.
Is to go really deep into recruiting, and it's harder now with signing day on December 4th because you're still in season. I mean, if you're a team that is playing this weekend, then recruiting is like it's in the middle of the season. Hey, look, it's the lifeblood of what every program does. Well, maybe not every program now that we have the transfer portal, but still for Nebraska, recruiting is at the heart of the whole thing. So it's essential to know and have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in that area in order to understand the direction of the program. So yeah, I'm fairly into understanding what's happening out there in the recruiting world.
Mitch, are you surprised just in general that a guy like Cortez Mills is flipping to Nebraska with the change of receiver coach and the offensive schematic change, or do you think that helped make that change for him when it came to boosting Nebraska's offense?
Well, I think it was headed in this direction, and he's been looking at Nebraska for a while, and this flip didn't come out of the blue. It was expected, to be clear, in the last 48 hours or so, and maybe even longer than that if you're inside the Nebraska program. So, I won't say that it's entirely because of Dana Holgorsen, being put in this position for, beyond beyond here in bowl season. And, we're still waiting for certain to see what happens at that receiver coach spot. But obviously he's got that connection with Dakeil Shorts, who played for Holgerson at West Virginia, coached for him at Houston. And it would appear that he's on his way to being the Nebraska wide receivers coach. I don't think that part of it, the assistant coach, necessarily factored into this flip. I think it was more about what Cortez Mills saw at Nebraska as a program overall. And then the Holgerson thing, I do think that was a factor. You want to know the direction that the offense is going and what kind of an offense the team that you're headed to is going to play in your time at that school.
Mitch, speaking of kind of some of the uncertainty, whether it's with the wide receiver coach spot or obviously with Tony White moving on and uncertainty what's going on with that defensive staff, are you surprised at all, kind of from a bigger picture standpoint, that there wasn't more movement? It sounds like Jeremiah Jones won't sign today, but are you surprised that there wasn't more movement in the class with the kind of timing of some of those announcements?
That there wasn't more movement in as far as the recruits went.
Yeah, just more uncertainty in some of their commitments than there seems to have been.
No, recruiting is such a long process, and if there's a head coaching change, then it tends to really shake things up. But recruits, they see things different than fans do, and I think for fans, the last couple of days have been traumatic, with players going in the portal. Your defensive coordinator leaves. That's of course going to be a big deal if you're a defensive player coming to Nebraska. But those recruits who are committed are hearing from the head coach. They're possibly hearing from their position coach. They're being reassured. And they've picked Nebraska and settled on Nebraska over a period of months. I mean, look, there's flips all over this sport. Just get on social media over the last few weeks, and it's flip season. That's a real thing. Nebraska's avoided big hits in that area. You go through the list of Nebraska signees, and there are plenty, who were involved in a flip one way or the other. And there were some who left Nebraska to flip, but there wasn't a ton of drama, as you guys know, late in this thing with players jumping off or jumping on. And, that just speaks to the way that Matt Rule went about and his staff went about recruiting these guys. They didn't, sell them something that all of a sudden wasn't going to be there on December 1st. And I'm not shocked, based in the context of the change that we're seeing, the transitions that we're seeing in the program. I'm not shocked that there was a minimal effect on the recruiting class as a result of that.
Mitch, with the transfer portal opening up and some of the guys getting in there, obviously there's been, as you mentioned, a little bit of fan fatigue with some of the names that have popped up and maybe even some surprise from that side. Was this maybe not necessarily the plan for this year's recruitment class, but do you think that there's immediate holes that those transfer portal losses that Nebraska now has to fill with their own transfer portal additions or other guys that they might look for when it comes to today and National Signing Day or the 26th class?
Yeah, Nebraska was always going to have to go into the portal in this offseason. Even with the roster being cut down to 105, and you figure, all right, well, they're looking to trim the roster, not add more to the roster. It's why you see the recruiting class, with Mills now at 20 instead of the 28 or 29 that Nebraska has traditionally signed under Matt Rule. They knew that they had to be judicious with this class because even with the cut down that has to happen to get to 105, you need to give yourself some room to build things back up through the portal. There will be holes to fill. And this is, again, just another reality in college football. Nebraska hasn't experienced as much turnover in the first 2 years under Rule as I think we're seeing here this year before the portal's even open for non-graduates. It's already filling up with announcements from Nebraska players that go in some ways beyond what we saw in the last two off seasons. And it's going to continue. There's going to be a lot of names that go in, and many of them are going to be players that you would expect that would leave Nebraska in order to get the Huskers to 105. And then there will be quite a few others, or certainly some others that aren't expected, like a James Williams or, a Jamari Butler, Mekhi Bayer. There will be others like that, and they're going to have to go to the portal for sure. They already were, and now even more so to fill some of those holes. And Nebraska's in a good spot with the portal. Like, they're a school that has the resources to be able to recruit out of the portal. At the end of it, you have to be better than where you started. Like, it has to be a net positive, but between players that go in and players that come out for Nebraska here in this portal season.
Mitch, as you go through some of the names of the guys that have entered the portal that maybe either surprised or disappointed fans, how much of it do you think is sort of evaluating, whether it's from the coaches or just themselves, sort of taking inventory of where they're at within their position group, and maybe not just this recruiting class, but some of the young guys? I mean, I think of like a Vincent Shavers and a Willis McGahee that line up with some of those positions of guys that are leaving. How much of it is you kind of look around the room and you're like, okay, if we're cutting this thing down to 105 anyway, there may not be as many snaps for me next year as I would like, even though
I think it goes through the head of some of the players, some of them. I mean, that may have happened with Prince Will Umanmielen. He may have looked at like the way that the snaps were trending for him this year, and that could have been a factor in his decision to go in. He was a freshman All-American. I think the expectation for any freshman All-American coming into their sophomore year is they're going to see an increase in playing time. They're going to become an all-conference candidate. They're going to be a starter throughout the season. And that was not the way that it went for Prince Will in his second season in the program. So specifically with him, I could see that being part of the decision. That's not applicable to everyone. It's not applicable to Jamari Butler. Is it applicable to Mekhi Bayer? Maybe, but he didn't see a shortage of snaps for the most part here in 24. With James Williams, that one maybe surprises me the most because of the path that he took to get to Lincoln and what the Nebraska program has done for him. But it does become you have to think about yourself first when you get to this point, both in terms of your earning power and your opportunity to play. And I'd be curious to hear from him. And he's somebody that I would love to get the opportunity to talk to. Like, not all of them need to sit down and explain. None of them have to, but like, I don't even know that it would be intensely interesting to hear from all of them about what their decision process was. James Williams would be somebody that I'd be genuinely interested to hear, like, what was the process for you in thinking this thing through that made you decide you were doing this. Now, if we see Terrence Knighton leave and follow Tony White to Florida State, then it becomes a little more clear with Williams, because we've already heard him talk about his relationship with Coach Knighton. But as of now, as of yesterday, Knighton is still there and a part of this coaching staff at Nebraska.
Mitch, kind of on the topic of conversations and revealing comments, how open do you think Matt Rule will be today? Maybe not just talking about his recruitment class, which is the plan for his press conference, but about the other questions he's going to get asked, likely about some of the transfer portal losses, guys moving on, and maybe the specifics about that.
Well, he'll probably come out at the beginning and have a few comments about the recruiting class, and that might be about it on talking about that group. I mean, it's not that it isn't interesting. It is interesting, and you'd like to hear about Cortez Mills and how Nebraska was able to wrangle him away from OU. You'd like to hear about Dawson Merritt and how Nebraska was able to get him away from Alabama, and the job that some of their coaches who haven't been on the road before as recruiters have had in this recruiting cycle, like Jamar Mosey and Keith Williams. And I think Rule will find a way to get to all of that. I'd like to hear, we could do 30 minutes with him or more for certain about this recruiting class. But the stuff that's at the top of people's minds today, because of the way this week has gone, is what happened with Tony White. Like, why did he decide to leave after 2 seasons to go to Florida State? Like, kind of thought that he was holding out for a head coaching position. That seemed to be the message a year ago at this time, or 10 months ago. So that's going to be a big topic. He's going to have to address the Holgorsen thing. Like, how big is it for Nebraska this is a positive. How big is it for Nebraska to have locked up Dana Holgorsen? And the stuff about the portal, I think he'll probably have a general, he's not going to throw anybody under the bus, and he'll probably have a general statement, a general answer regarding all of the players that went in the portal. And, I think it'll be a message that he's supportive of those players. And if they want to go, then that's their decision. Like, that's been pretty steady from Matt Rule. He's not showing any kind of disappointment or anger directed at players in college football today who choose to go in the portal at any point in their careers. So I don't think we're going to get that from him today. But the stuff about the coordinators, it's going to be a big topic. And we could do 2 press conferences. You could do one today about the recruits and one tomorrow about everything else, but it's all going to be mashed into one.
We're talking with Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Mitch, I know you said you do get pretty into the recruiting and the signees here. Do you allow yourself to kind of, I don't know if excited's the right word, but to get kind of optimistic or kind of start to project on certain guys as you walk through them? Is there a guy in this class that you look at, you're like, hey, that's actually a really good fit for Nebraska? That's pretty exciting.
It's hard to project linemen, so I'll kind of stay away from that. And I know they're really excited about Cade Peterzak. I know they're really excited about Hammerbeck from South Dakota, from Juju Marks, or excited about Marks. But it's just hard to project those guys. Like, you don't expect that they're going to play right away in the program. Same thing with like Malcolm Simpson as a defensive lineman. That's like, get them in, let them get their feet on the ground and see what you have. So it's generally easier, I think, to be more optimistic immediately about the skill position guys. And I look at Jamarian Parker, and I think if he had been somebody who like did what Michael Terry did and wait until the end, there would have been way more hype around him as an athlete in in this recruiting cycle. But he made up his mind early, and he's got to be a piece that, talking about excited, he's got to be a piece that Dana Holgorsen is excited about being able to plug into that Nebraska offense. Maybe someone who could have an impact at a different position, but somebody who could have an impact like what we saw from Ja'Cory Barney this season. Assuming that it works out. You mentioned Ravi, Jeremiah Jones, waiting. Let's see where that's at. He's a super exciting athlete too, whether he plays on the offensive side or the defensive side of the ball. And Dawson Merritt and Christian Jones, I don't know that Nebraska could have done a lot better in getting a couple of linebackers to come in and fit what they want to do in that room. I mean, are there 2 higher ranked linebackers nationally out there that some teams signed? I'm sure there are. But for Nebraska, I think Dawson Merritt and Christian Jones fit the need, fit the requirement, the desire about as well as any 2 players at a position as you're going to find on a recruiting class in the Big Ten or nationally.
Mitch, sticking on the defensive side of the ball and on the idea of projecting, have you started to put together a mental list of potential defensive coordinators for Nebraska, or are you kind of more of a wait and see mode?
Well, I want to see what Matt Rule has to say about it today. It'll be his first time to talk about Tony's departure, and does he have his defensive coordinator on staff? They brought in John Butler in the summer, fully knowing that Butler has in his career plan to be a defensive coordinator at a major college or NFL team. And that doesn't mean that Nebraska's got to hire him or that Nebraska hired him in July with the intention of eventually having him as the successor to Tony White, but it doesn't mean that they didn't. So maybe he's the guy and he coordinates. I'd expect that. Well, unless you're going to go with like Terrence Knighton, unless you're going to go with Rob Dvorak, I would expect that Butler is going to coordinate the defense in the bowl game. Maybe that's an opportunity for him to earn the job. I don't know. It's a little unorthodox. Like, you probably want to have your DC decided on something other than that. But I'm just like thinking this through out loud. I mean, Butler's in the conversation for sure. And then if it's not him, it's wide open. Rule could decide to go with someone that he's comfortable with and has coached with in the past, like Jeff Collins, who's out of a job after Mac Brown at North Carolina got fired. Or you could see him play the game that he did with Tony White, where he found somebody who, had a connection to him way back, but really was just the name that he heard from talking to people out there. Same kind of path that he took to get to Dana Holgorsen. Yeah, there was a little bit of a connection between the two of them. They'd never coached together, though. He just went and tried to find the best offensive coordinator in Holgorsen, even doing it in the middle of a season. So I think that's, if I don't have a stake in it, but I think if I did, that's what I would want to see from Matt Rule. Get the best defensive coordinator who you can find. Like, use the blueprint that you did with Tony White and with Dana Holgorsen, instead of saying, I got this guy on my staff, he's the best one here in Lincoln right now, let's plug him in.
Mitch, with the team as it is right now, obviously, the bowl game's coming up. Everyone's still got to prepare for their matchup whenever that one is released and whenever the opponent gets announced. But Big Ten teams were released yesterday. 7 Huskers were honorable mention, and I think the big uproar was that Ty Robinson only could get to third team. What could he have done more other than maybe win a couple more games as the Husker program to move up? He's top 10 on both sides. I'm sure you were a bit shocked by that result.
I wasn't shocked because I've seen that happen with Nebraska in the Big Ten, and you added 4 teams to the Big Ten this year. That Oregon had a bunch of players on the first team and second team, and so that there's it's harder. It's almost like making an All-American team. So I wasn't shocked, but I think Ty deserves better. I think Ty was not the 12th, 11th or 12th, whatever it is. The number of players who were put on the teams ahead of him, I don't believe that those players are all better than him or all had better seasons than him. Now, I understand that Michigan's got a couple of D linemen who are All-Americans and are first-round picks, and that there are other players out there who are outstanding at that position. So I'm not saying like Ty needed to be the defensive lineman of the year in the Big Ten. Like that's not what I saw, but I saw him as a top 5 or 6 D lineman in the Big Ten this year in watching every team, either in person or in the teams that Nebraska didn't play on TV. Doesn't mean I'm right, but that's just my opinion on it. I do think that he's impacted in a negative way by playing for a team that's not in the college football playoff hunt. Like those teams that everyone is watching. If you're on Indiana this year and they became one of the big stories nationally, like their players are getting the benefit of the doubt, or they're getting, they're getting a boost in these awards in award season. And that's nothing new. Like you see it all the time. If you play for a 6-6 team, you can probably expect to come in a little bit lower than maybe what you deserve.
Mitch, just a couple minutes left here with you. Are you surprised that we haven't, I know Coach Rule's talked about it, but that we aren't making more about the fact that, unlike the last 8 years, Nebraska kind of gets a whole second spring ball worth of practices between now and the bowl game? I mean, you're literally going from 15 in the spring to now 30 between the end of the regular season and spring now. Like, are we paying enough attention to that? Because that seems like, for a staff that wants to be developmental, a pretty big deal.
It's been so much on the back burner because of the Iowa game and the fallout from that. And then, losing your defensive coordinator 2 days later, like in a normal situation where just like the status quo was reigning, if Nebraska had beaten Iowa, all the coaching staff stays intact, there aren't a bunch of announcements about players going to the portal here in this first week of December, we would be paying more attention, 1, to the recruiting class that's signing today, and 2, to what you just said, the impact of having extra bowl practices. And some of these recruits can be a part of bowl practices, and we've hardly talked about that too, which is a completely new thing for Nebraska. You never had early enrollees practicing with the team before bowl games. It's a fascinating kind of dynamic that's going to play out to some degree, at least in Lincoln here this month. We'll get to it. Like, we haven't even got a bowl assignment yet, so we don't know when Nebraska is going to play, who it's going to play. That's going to happen on Sunday. When you get to that, then I think a lot of the conversations are going to turn to what's going on with bowl prep and where's Nebraska, how much practice are they going to get? You can also make too much of that. It is a big deal, and it's a big deal for the young players for sure. But remember, there's going to be 105 guys on the roster next year. How many of them are a part of these bowl practices, or how many of the players who are a part of bowl practices are going to be on the 105 next year? Well, none of the seniors, none of the players who were going to the portal before or after bowl season. Like, it's there's going to be a lot of new players too. So it's not like everybody on the 2025 team is going to be out there running around. It's like maybe 60%, which is significant, but I don't want to make it out like this is the end all be all, the hurdle that Nebraska has to clear, getting 12 to 15 practices. This is it. This is what's going to put them over the top. I don't look at it that way, but it's definitely significant and it's important for all of the players who are coming back.
That's Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Mitch, we appreciate your time as always. We'll talk again soon.
All right. Thanks, guys.
That's Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. If you're ready to take control of your weight loss this season, Midland's Family Urgent Care is there for you with affordable, effective weight loss medications that can help make your journey easier. They've got tirzepatide for just $5.99 for the first 3 months, or choose semaglutide for $3.49 for the first 3 months. That's the one I'm on, semaglutide, and I'm down about 30 pounds. Both are FDA-approved options to help you lose weight safely and effectively. Give Midland's Family Urgent Care a call, 402-810-9494, to get your appointment started today.
We will be back. 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 You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We're back here on Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, KFOR in Lincoln. That's Austin. I'm Ravi here on the Pillar Exterior stage. We appreciate all the guests that have joined us this morning. We'll be joined by our final guest, Tim Verghese, in the next segment. But it is now time for Bet On It, brought to you by Warhorse Sportsbook, the best place in Nebraska to place your sports bets. Get to the casinos in Lincoln or in Omaha, and you can bet on nearly every major sporting event. And they've always got great promotions going on as well. Make sure you get to warhorsecasino.com to learn all about those. So Dan Holgerson was talking a little bit during the Husker show that the DB's hosting, that we are that we've kind of been following along as it's going live on Twitter and things like that. Daniel Holgerson's talking, and he says they expect 20 to 30 transfer target visitors into Lincoln. Now, that's not that they're going to bring in 20 or 30 transfers, but let's say they bring in half of that lower number. Let's say they bring in 10 transfers, okay? Mm-hmm. You're looking at about a 20-person class, give or take one, depending on, looks like Jeremiah Jones is going to end up flipping to Missouri, but let's call it about 30 guys total, okay? Nebraska's currently, I believe, at about 140 for their current roster size. We're going to add 30 to that. That puts us at 170, okay?
Yep.
If I'm doing my math correctly, there are only 19 people currently listed as seniors for the 2024 season. So that brings us back down to call it, let's say, 150. Mm-hmm. You're looking at 45 guys. That's a hard number.
Yep.
45 guys that will enter the transfer portal then. Mm-hmm. We're at 8 or 10, including the two guys that entered before this week. And
now, is the original roster number with the guys who have entered now?
Not yet. That was
gotcha. So we're subtracting another 10.
So we're down to 40 full guys, or 40 additional guys outside of the 10 that are already in that are going to still enter the transfer portal.
Yep.
Or just decide to stop playing football. Some of the walk-ons, I imagine, may not try and transfer anywhere else. They're like, I'm at Nebraska. I want to be at Nebraska, whatever. Right. Or, like, I don't know. I do wonder about, like, Jalen Lloyd, for instance, right? That's a guy who's been productive to a certain degree, has gotten on the field both of his first 2 years. But you've got Ja'Cory Barney, who seemed to take some of his touches last year. You've got Cortez Mills, very similar size, very similar skill set, who you would imagine is going to take some more of those touches this year. And you've got Jalen Lloyd, who's an incredible track athlete. Like, is that a situation where, like, does he want to try and continue to play football? Does he want to just focus on track where he could potentially be an Olympian? I mean, he's kind of that level, at least coming out of high school. He was sort of that level of track guy. Does he want to do that at Nebraska? Does he want to do it somewhere else? Like, there's going to be a lot of those types of guys that maybe they don't leave, but maybe they're not on the football team anymore either. But you're talking about, including the 10 that are already in there, 50 guys. We're talking about 45, 50 guys that are going to be, that of names we're going to see, and we're only at 10. Mm-hmm. So I'm just trying to prepare that there's going to be a lot more.
Yes. Yeah. And you just have to get used to this. And as you mentioned, too, there are going to be some that make the decision that, hey, I'm done with football because this was my opportunity. This is where I wanted to be to walk on.
I was a Nebraska kid. Yep. I wanted to walk on at Nebraska. That opportunity is not there anymore.
Not every player that enters the transfer portal is made the same. Some players will go down in levels.
Yeah.
And not just a group of 5. There are some players that could be, maybe not on Nebraska's roster, but nationally, that could move down to Division II, to other levels of football.
Yeah.
Yes, there's plenty of layers of football that there is still to go as well.
And here's the thing about this is I know there's going to be guys in that 45 to 50 that we're sitting here and going, man, really wish he was still in the fold, right? I'm sure a lot of people feel that way about Prince Will. But if it's happening to Nebraska, Nebraska's not the only team that has to cut down to 105. Now, Nebraska carries a heavier roster than a lot of people do. But again, a lot of those extra spots are going to be walk-on guys that we're not necessarily focused on to the same degree.
Yeah, 1 to 151 were not the same.
Yeah, exactly, right? So there's going to be the same level of guys leaving other programs that are leaving Nebraska.
Yes.
Right? And guys that, okay, maybe this guy's a better fit at this place. Maybe he's been more productive at a smaller school, and Nebraska wants to take a chance on the productivity as opposed to, it seems as though this is anecdotal, but nationally, the guys that move up a level, that go from being super productive at a smaller or lower level to a power conference level, seem to have just as much, if not more, success than the guys that were highly touted recruits that haven't performed yet.
Yes.
Right? And so, Samaj Toure is a really good example for Nebraska that's happened. And you see it, Cam Ward, you've got it all across the college football landscape right now. Dylan Gabriel is a great example. He goes from UCF to Oklahoma. Now he's playing on the number one team in the country.
Carson Steele's another one too, and now he's a pro.
Yeah, you've got a ton of these guys that they're super productive at lower levels that you're going to see come up as well. So this, more than any year, I'm not really worried about, if you want something I'm betting on, I'm not worried about Nebraska being able to find good guys in the portal to replace the guys that are departing, because there's going to be more guys in the portal this year than ever before. Just from a number crunch standpoint, we haven't even gotten to the guys that would have gone into the portal anyway because they don't like their situation.
When is this cutoff date for this 105 roster limit?
It's supposed to be, I believe, by the time your fall camp opens.
So, again, keep that in mind, too, that this 140-man roster could stick around through the spring game, and then you see another wave of evacuations.
Right.
But more than likely, a lot more will probably enter prior to that.
Yeah, so you're going to have a decent amount enter now.
Yep.
And then you've got a brief window after spring period ends. And then that's kind of it. Like, that's your last window there. So it will be interesting to see what the distribution is. I would imagine most of them leave now. That way you won't see – I don't think many people are going to take a chance not to have spring ball at their new location.
Yep.
Let's get to TK real quick. Wants to talk about Nebraska basketball. TK, what's going on, bud?
Good morning, fellas. How we doing?
Doing okay, TK. What do you got?
So it is bet on it, and so I'm going to let Ravi be the Nebraska ball hater that he is. If you at FanDuel, it's like plus 106 that Nebraska makes the tournament. Are you putting money on that bet?
Ooh, plus 106. I'd probably want a little more plus money than that, if I'm being honest. That basically puts it at even odds that they make the tournament. I think they are I think they're going to be a team that's squarely on the bubble just because of what I think the Big Ten is this year. And I do wonder if they're going to be able to score enough long-term to be able to be better than a bubble team. But if I'm looking at a bubble team, I probably want a little value there. I'd like it a little higher than 106. But, listen, Nebraska is a pretty good team that's going to probably end up very much in the conversation for an NCAA tournament bid.
You heard it here first, folks. Certified Nebraska ball hater, Ravi Lulla.
Appreciate it, TK. Listen, they're a good basketball team. Yeah. They do have, much like Creighton, they have some flaws.
Listen, when they get into those first two Big Ten games, I will be much more interested to see what their conversation will look like, because I think those will be more of a telltale sign of what Nebraska's season could be on the hardwood, more than what we have seen so far. Even with the Creighton game withstanding and everything else, I think that even these December 2 Big Ten games, I think will tell more about what Nebraska's postseason could potentially look like, more than what we saw in November.
Well, I think we're going to have a really interesting I think we're gonna have a really interesting time seeing if what Connor Essegian is as a basketball player at this point in his career. Obviously, he's had some really good moments for Nebraska early. Can he consistently be that guy throughout Big Ten play? We've seen this both with Creighton and Nebraska. As you get into conference play, the scouting reports on your guys get a little bit better. People, especially the second time through, obviously the Big East plays a true round robin and the Big Ten doesn't. But when you're playing some of these guys for a second time, that starts to get a lot more interesting when you've got a guy that doesn't have the track record of being a proven go-to scorer, and I think that's going to be what they need Essegian to be moving forward if they're going to continue to have this level of success and make the NCAA tournament. But I mean, plus 106 is about the right number. For Nebraska. I mean, it's about even.
Right.
And that's where I would put it. They're a bubble team. I think they're going to be a team squarely on the bubble, and that's what that number reflects is the plus 106.
And they're going to continue, as long as they keep on the trend that they've been on, they're going to keep receiving top 25 votes until proven otherwise. But I don't think that they'll break through until they have, again, the Big Ten breakthrough. They're going to need to beat a team that's within their conference because they're still 11th out of 18 in that conference. And even though, they were preseason pick 13th, you have to think that they've still got some leg room to go before they're having a real conversation about feeling secure on a tournament berth.
Well, and it's going to be interesting because I think the Big Ten is probably going to depends on how the season shakes out, but you're probably looking between 8 and 12 Big Ten teams in the NCAA tournament on most years. So Nebraska's kind of in the bottom half of that range, which, again, is reflective of that number. The last number I want to talk about, Kansas is a 3.5-point favorite tonight. That's down from 4.5 yesterday and earlier today. If this wasn't Creighton, I'd look at that and say, DB, that's a stinky line because that number should be bigger for number one Kansas 100%. Going in to CHI.
What do they know?
What do they know that we don't know? Because as we've learned, there's not a lot of free money.
No.
That's Bet On It, brought to you by Warhorse Sportsbook. We'll have Tim Verghese coming up next.
We will be back. We will be back. We will be back. will be back. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio.
Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, KFOR in Lincoln. That's Austin. I'm Ravi here at Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. We will be joined shortly by Tim Verghese from inside Nebraska to put a final bow on this National Signing Day. As we mentioned earlier, it looks like Jeremiah Jones does not look like he's going to end up with Nebraska. He delayed his signing, and there's some reports he'll be flipping to Missouri, which had been the concern for a while, especially if you'd listen to our segments with Tim kind of throughout the last few weeks. That was a concern with Jeremiah Jones as the in-state team was making a hard push for him. But Nebraska did get a flip from Cortez Mills earlier this morning from Oklahoma to Nebraska, which had been in the works for a little bit as well. So that's a big get for Nebraska.
It's just been a blitz of a day. I mean, it's just been crazy, and just kind of trying to catch up on all the commentary that's been happening as well, either from the Husker Radio Network and catching up with what they've had to say with different recruits and the conversation with coaches. It feels like this is generally, even with Jones maybe flipping a commitment to Missouri, this is overall maybe a really positive outlook that Nebraska just needed, a breath of relief. And it is a busy day. It's a hectic day, but it feels like this is a positive, just like just a deep sigh to let the shoulders, relax a little bit, and you can celebrate a couple of wins before you, unfortunately, later this afternoon have to go back to the podium and answer some of the questions from earlier this week.
Here to answer some questions for us is Tim Verghese from inside Nebraska. Tim, how are you this morning?
Hey, not too bad. Not too bad. Been a busy morning.
Yeah, we appreciate you taking the time to join us. So quick update. Want to make sure we've got everything up to date. So it looks like everybody so far for Nebraska's class has signed except Houston Kahina Torres, which I believe it's still like 4 o'clock in the morning there. And then the Jeremiah Jones, which it looks like he's not going to end up at Nebraska. Is that right? Am I up to date?
Yes, that is up to date, I believe. I'm running through to make sure, but I believe that's everybody.
So with Jeremiah Jones, at this point, we don't expect him to be part of the class. Is that right?
I mean, that's the thing. It seems like Mizzou's pushing hard. They made a late push once again, and that they're a program that even when he announced that he was kind of shutting down his recruitment, you always have to be wary of Missouri in any recruitment. They have the ability to kind of always surge late if and when they want to. And yeah, it's just one of those situations. I don't think the questions around Garrett McGuire's long-term status don't really help, even if he does stick around in the staff in some capacity. I think the fact that he was the lead recruiter there and is no longer going to be at least a position coach is something that didn't really help Nebraska in this one. But we'll see. This is one of those situations where I could still see Matt Rule and Garrett McGuire and the staff potentially pulling this out and holding on to him. I think the best thing for Nebraska at this point would be for him to hit the pause button and maybe sign later this week, maybe Thursday or Friday. Give it a day to kind of just let both staffs make final pitches and kind of hear everybody out. But as things stand, I'm not expecting to get into the class.
Tim, with all the positive news of the signees and flips like Cortez Mills, there was one disappointment for Husker fans with Michael Terry staying in-state at Texas. How close was Nebraska to pulling that off?
Oh man, real close, and that's the thing. It's we saw comments afterwards being like, oh man, I mean, I feel like the kid was just using Nebraska. I mean, this kid, I'll say this, the kid is not really on social media like that. Like he just started using social media in high school, so he's not even really on it like that. And he's a guy that wasn't really in it for any of this. And Nebraska made this a tougher decision than he ever expected, than Texas ever expected. Texas wanted him bad, and they made him a priority since the spring. Nebraska had the long-standing relationships, and there were a couple of times, and we've said this in the past, Texas wanted him to commit at the end of the summer. He so decided to hold off because of what he was intrigued by at Nebraska. Mid-season, Texas tried to get him to shut things down again. He still wanted to keep an eye on Nebraska, and by the end of the season, ultimately Texas came out on top. And I'll say this too, NIL didn't ultimately play a factor. At the end of the day, the offers were relatively similar on the table. It ultimately just came down to what he felt more comfortable with. At the end of the day, I think Nebraska winning a couple more games this year, a little more clarity on the coaching staff side of things would have potentially helped Nebraska here too. But at the end of the day, they fought really hard. And this is a recruitment that, at the end of the day, these relationships pay off, because down the line, we've seen it before, we're going to see it again. Texas is a very crowded receiver room. Terry could end up being the odd man out, and Nebraska could end up being the benefiting end of that down the line.
Tim, you mentioned some of the coaching clarity and things like that. Obviously, today and yesterday have been a lot about getting this recruiting class in the door, but how are you filtering through all of the coaching staff shakeup news, whether it's it appears DeKel Shorts is going to end up being the wide receiver coach or working with the wide receivers in some fashion, and then obviously Nebraska's still looking for a DC.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the defensive coordinator use, I thought it was interesting the way that broke, just because, White is a good recruiter, but at the end of the day, I think a lot of these guys in this class, as you're seeing now with most everybody signed, the key relationships were the position coaches. Those guys sticking around, the fact, I'll say this, no one's really sure what Terrence Knighton's going to do, but the fact that he's on these signing day shows this morning, I think bodes well. And the fact that all these guys have committed to, we'll see what ends up happening there. But he's at least done his part to help the guys that he brought to Nebraska, signed with Nebraska. He's done his part there. So regardless of what happens, Knighton saw this through. And that's been, very, good for him, regardless of what happens. And yeah, that secondary, I think John Butler did a good job of building those relationships, keeping those guys locked in. And then Rob Dvorak, I mean, more than anything, I think his effort really impressive, because it's a really good linebacker group that they put together. And those guys would have had some late options if they chose to explore it, but they chose to stick with Nebraska.
Tim, the receivers and the linebackers feel like this is the strength of this year's recruiting class. Is there an underrated position group that Husker fans should be keying more on from this class of 25?
I think the defensive line class I just mentioned. I think solely because I think I'll say two. So the defensive line class, one, because I think all three of those guys have the ability to come into Nebraska and contribute early, especially with some of these snaps that have just become available with all the portal exits on that side of the ball. Malcolm Simpson's a guy that can line up all over the line. Will likely starts his career defensive end, but can move inside. Same with Cade Petrak. Tyson Terry is a guy that you look at him, it's hard not to see, some Nash Hutmacher in him. Also a very talented, well-accomplished wrestler off the field. Has a lot of those similar traits. And I think all three guys are going to have an opportunity to play into the rotation like Keona Davis did this year, like Riley Van Poppel did last year, maybe even a bigger role. So I say that group. And then the other one, I'll say this too. I like this running back room. I mean, I like Connor Booth. I've after seeing him in person this year, getting an idea of just how big he is. I think Nebraska fans should feel a little more comfortable with the take. He's a legit 6'2", 210 pounds. Shows good vision, shows good long speed. And produce the way you would expect a Power 5 commit to produce when you're playing Class C2 competition. Then you have Jamarian Parker, who needs to put on some weight, but he's electric. He's a home run hitter. He has that top-end speed Nebraska doesn't really have in the running back room right now. And he's a guy that, can get north to south pretty quickly and can break through holes pretty quick too. So I like the little room they put together there.
All right, Tim, I got to ask about maybe my favorite guy in the class, and I know one of your favorite guys in the class as well, Pierce Mooberry. We talked about the linebacker room, but the guys that get a lot of the headlines, Dawson Merritt and Christian Jones, Pierce Mooberry's kind of flown under the radar a little bit for a lot of people. I know you like him a lot. What have you seen from Pierce that kind of makes you so enamored with him?
I think it's just like, I mean, the biggest thing for me is you see a very functional athlete. You see a guy that, you watches film across multiple years, and you see a guy that year over year seriously improved. Like last year, it felt like he was just getting comfortable on the defensive side of the ball and really starting to settle in. This year, he's like in the box and reading plays out and showing a lot of comfort, like using his eyes from the box, reading and reacting, making plays quickly. Like, he feels like he's really settled in at linebacker this year. You like the length, you like the athleticism, you like, again, he's got verified measurables, and you like the fact that, again, like for a guy that's relatively thin that will need some time to put on weight, you watch him play, and this is a guy that's wiry, strong. He's pushing guys backwards. Guys, he'll go and tackle someone, they don't move forward. For the most part, he's pushing guys back. He's a guy that doesn't really get run over. He's an emphatic tackler. He can cover sideline to sideline, and then you watch him in 7-on-7. You watch him in coverage. He can flip his hips and run with really good tight ends and slot receivers. And so I'm excited to see kind of how Nebraska uses him, how he continues to develop, and his long-term growth potential too. Because this is a guy that has plenty of opportunity and space in his frame to add, 15 to 20 plus pounds.
Tim, last one. Is there any of the flips or commitments today going to affect maybe transfer portal moves in or out of the Nebraska program moving forward for the next month?
Cortez, just getting Cortez in, and obviously they were waiting the decision of Michael Terry because, even as soon as this weekend, they felt they still had a chance. So I think the fact that they went 1 for 3 on their pass catching targets, because remember Chase Lofton as well reaffirmed his commitment to Florida State. So they had 3 pass catching targets left. 1 of the 3 is committed. The other 2 are going to stick. One's going to Texas, the other one's going to Florida State. I think you're going to see Nebraska be a little aggressive to bring in pass catchers. We heard Dana Holgerson this morning say Nebraska is going to bring in 20 to 30 transfers for visits at least. Obviously not bringing in 20, 30 new guys, but they're going to really evaluate the options in the transfer portal on the offensive side of the ball. And then Jones, I think, makes things interesting in the secondary because he's a guy that likely starts his career at wide receiver, but would, I think, long-term had the best high ceiling at DB. Nebraska also missing out on Aiden Manitai. I think you're going to see Nebraska, they were already planning on being a little aggressive in the portal to find veteran defensive backs. I think you see them add some depth potentially in that class too, especially if they see some transfers out from that room.
That's Tim Verghese, Inside Nebraska. Tim, we appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you again on Friday.
Yes, sir. Talk soon.
That's Tim Verghese from Inside Nebraska. A little extended bet on it. DB sent me his locks of the day.
Let's go, DB.
He's been on a heater. He's got the Jays +4. Ooh. He's got Iowa State -5.5, and he says lock it in.
What does DB know?
I don't know, but
what does he know?
He's been on a heater, so we will wanted to make sure we got that out to you. And a little bonus bet on it brought to you by Warhorse Sportsbook. Austin, thanks so much for joining me this morning. Thank you to all of our guests, all million of them. We appreciate you guys giving us a great signing day. DB and I will be back tomorrow with more Hurrdat Sports Radio.
See you. Have a good day. Love you.